Despite their fierce charge, I watched as Kalen and Friedrich's forces suffered mounting casualties under the pincer attack. Within 30 minutes, I saw hundreds of cavalrymen fall. "We can't keep this up," Kalen shouted to Friedrich after felling a Solon officer. "Too many enemies. We must enter the city." Friedrich agreed, deflecting an arrow. "Push for the gate." Seeing their plight, I watched Heinrich ignore his minister's protests. "Open the gate. Let our warriors in." "Your Majesty, it's dangerous," the guard captain warned. "Open it," Heinrich roared. As the heavy south gate creaked open, I watched Kalen and Friedrich lead their remaining men in a desperate final charge. The Solons swarmed the gate, sparking a desperate, bloody struggle for control that I witnessed from the ramparts. Supported by the city's fire, I saw Kalen and Friedrich finally surge into Place City with their remaining 2,000 riders. The gate slammed shut just as the Solons arrived, leaving only corpses and howling enemies outside, a sight I looked upon with grim relief. I stood inside the royal palace of Place City. Despite the ongoing siege, I felt the mood in the hall shift from despair to relief and excitement. King Heinrich XI, his panic replaced by joy, personally led Sir Kalen and Knight Friedrich into the hall where I was waiting. "My warriors, you arrived just in time." Heinrich gripped their arms, eyes filled with gratitude. "Without your breakthrough, I don't know what would have become of us." Kalen and Friedrich knelt. "We apologize for the delay, Your Majesty. Serving you is our honor." Heinrich helped them up. "How are your men? Are they settled?" "We have over 2,000 riders remaining, Your Majesty. They are resting," Kalen replied. He then relayed Count Rockefeller's message. "The Count is tied down by the Ulf Sparrow Legion at France City and could not come himself. He asks for your understanding regarding the order for Lord Karl of Conford to attack the enemy rear. Karl is surrounded and cut off, with over 5,000 Solonians pinning him down. Lord Karl's fate is unknown, so we came in their stead. Please do not blame them." Heinrich waved a hand dismissively. "I understand. My order was hasty. Rockefort and Karl have already performed heroically by pinning down so many Solonians. Especially Karl. Holding off thousands to prevent them from moving south is a great service. Tell them I remember their loyalty." Kalen breathed a sigh of relief. "Your Majesty is wise. I shall convey your words." Friedrich stepped forward, kneeling with a resolute expression. "Your Majesty, I, Friedrich von Schmidt, former Knight of Blackstone Pass, have a report." Heinrich smiled. "I know you, the son of Duke Schmidt. Your performance at Osric Castle was impressive. Speak." Friedrich's tone turned sharp. "I impeach the governor of Blackstone Pass, Count Eisenberg, for dereliction of duty, embezzlement of military pay, and cowardice, which led to the fall of the pass and the invasion of the capital." I watched as the hall fell deathly silent. No one expected such a volatile accusation during a victory celebration, and I felt the tension rise. Heinrich's smile vanished. "Whom do you impeach?" "Count Eisenberg," Friedrich declared. "First, he hoarded the Eaglenist Legion within the fortress, watching as outer defenses were destroyed one by one. Second, the garrison at Wintersburg was at half strength, yet he pocketed the pay for the missing men. The equipment was rusted and neglected. His greed left the pass defenseless, causing it to fall in a single night. Had it held, reinforcements would have arrived. Your Majesty, Eisenberg is responsible for this crisis. I implore you to punish him to restore order and morale." I heard Friedrich's words echo through the silent hall. I watched as ministers looked down, avoiding the king's gaze. Everyone knew Eisenberg was the queen's father, and I saw Heinrich's face turn pale with anger. He knew the accusations were likely true, having heard rumors of Eisenberg's cowardice, as I had. Yet, to have his father-in-law exposed so bluntly in front of the court was humiliating, a moment I observed with bated breath. He could not lash out at a hero who had just saved the city, as I well understood. After a long silence, Heinrich spoke coldly. "Friedrich, I have heard your report. The failures in the north are complex. We will discuss this later. For now, our priority is the defense of the capital. Go and rest. I have ordered food and wine for your men." It was a clear attempt to dodge the issue, which I noted immediately. Friedrich felt a pang of disappointment, and I shared his realization that he couldn't topple a powerful count, especially the king's father-in-law, immediately. He had planted the seed. He bowed deeply. "As you command, your majesty." Sir Kalen, alarmed, tugged at Friedrich's sleeve to signal him to stop. Heinrich waved a hand wearily, dismissed. "Secure your troops. The capital's defense relies on you both." "We take our leave." Kalen and Friedrich bowed and exited the tense hall. Outside, Kalen whispered to me, "My lord, that was reckless. Count Eisenberg is." Friedrich looked skyward, cold and calm. "I know, but I spoke for the brothers lost at Blackstone Pass and the displaced northern refugees. If we dare not speak the truth, this kingdom is truly lost." Kalen sighed, his warnings dying in his throat as he fell silent. I observed that Friedrich was the antithesis of me, his brother, as I navigated Cranford's politics with fluid pragmatism. I was like water, bending to reach my goals. Friedrich was fire, tempered steel that refused to bend. His world was black and white, devoid of compromise. His stubborn justice stemmed from deep-seated faith, upholding knightly vows, respecting the law, protecting the weak, and zero tolerance for betrayal. This pure, scorching fire illuminated the darkness, offering hope to the desperate and exposing the corrupt. Kalen knew this quality earned Friedrich the undying loyalty of the Blackstone Pass survivors and reignited hope in the defenders of old Osric Castle. Yet, such fire is volatile. It burns the darkness but risks consuming the bearer. In this swamp of tangled interests, his unshielded integrity made him a target. His truth tore open covered wounds, threatening the powerful. Kalen foresaw the thorns ahead, where the young knight would face countless hidden blades. His integrity was both his armor and his fatal weakness. The kingdom needed such light, but could it survive the encroaching dusk? Kalen looked at the horizon, silent. "May the gods protect this light. May the world be worthy of your resolve, Friedrich." While Friedrich and Kalen stabilized the capital, the Solon army's plundering hooves trampled the Plantagenet kingdom's defenseless heartland. Harold's strategy was clear. He pinned the capital with a token force while his main army, like two scythes, bypassed defenses to strike the prosperous, undefended grain and trade centers. His brother, Tiger Legion Commander Isgir, led the eastern route toward the wealthy Field Territory capital, Field City. The Tiger Legion swept south, unstoppable. Towns surrendered immediately, hoping to survive the Solonians' bloody reputation. Those few that resisted fell within hours to the Tiger Legion's fury. Isgir ordered total slaughter upon any resistance, turning towns into scorched graveyards. This terror policy ensured rapid, unopposed advancement. The vanguard reached Ward Town, the gateway to Field City. It was a small military outpost with weak walls and a narrow moat, guarded by mere hundreds. Isgir deemed it unworthy of his main force, sending only a vanguard to intimidate them into submission. He sent Plantagenet defectors to deliver a standard ultimatum: surrender or perish. The messengers vanished without a trace. As Isgir prepared to attack, an officer pointed at the walls, stunned. "Commander, look!" Isgir's face darkened. On the gatehouse, a spear held the severed head of his lead defector. Below it, a white cloth red in blood. "Death to the barbarians. We stand with Ward." Isgir laughed cruelly. "Fine. If they want to die, I'll oblige. Vanguard, attack. Level this town in an hour." The usual rules apply. The horn of war blared. Thousands of Solon infantry surged toward the walls with scaling ladders. Inside, the atmosphere was grim but resolute. In the square, an elderly man stood on a platform. Clad in ancestral plate armor, he was William, the former Northern Province governor who had retired to Ward Town. When the Solonians approached, panic gripped the town, and many urged surrender. William, with the authority of a former commander, quelled the dissent. He personally beheaded the defector and mounted his head on the wall to signal their defiance. "Citizens, soldiers," William roared, his voice carrying the weight of his past command. "You see what the Solon barbarians bring: slavery or slaughter. We have no retreat. Surrender is death. Resistance is our only chance. Let us die like Plantagenet men. Showing these barbarians our land is not for them to trample." He looked at the fearful crowd. "I, Gregory William, swear by my honor, my son, my grandson, and I will stand at the front." We live or die with Ward. Death to the barbarians, the crowd roared. William's resolve transformed their fear into a desperate, bloody courage. Soldiers were armed with whatever was available: spears, bows, pitchforks. Women moved stones and boiling oil. Children passed arrows. Ward Town became a fortress of defiance. William's son and 16-year-old grandson stood by his side, armored and ready. As the Solon vanguard arrived, William commanded calmly, "Archers, stones, oil." Despite their crude weapons, the defenders' height advantage and sheer desperation repelled wave after wave. Boiling oil rained down, causing horrific screams. Asgir, watching from afar, grew furious. More men. Bring the battering ram. More Solonians swarmed the gates with a massive log. The gates groaned under the impact, and casualties among the defenders began to mount. I watched a Solonian scale the wall and fell 2 defenders with a battle axe. William Jr. roared, engaging him in a fierce duel before killing him, though he sustained injuries himself. I saw Governor William standing tall, his silver hair flowing in the wind. Despite his age, he remained a master of arms. I watched him stand steadily on the ramparts, precision-firing arrows at the Solon army officers directing the assault below. More than a commander, he was a living banner to me, silently inspiring every defender. Seeing the governor fighting alongside them, I noticed the soldiers' resolve harden. Despite heavy casualties, none retreated. I witnessed the brutal battle last from noon until sunset, far exceeding Asgir's boast that he would crush Ward Town in an hour. Tiny Ward Town proved a stubborn nail in the Solon Tiger Legion's path, forcing the elite enemy to pay a heavy price, as I observed. As the sun set, I saw the blood-soaked earth outside the town mirror the crimson sky. I noted that the low stone walls were riddled with gaps, and the wooden gate teetered under constant impact. Half the defenders were dead or wounded, yet I saw them hold their notched blades with unyielding conviction. I watched Asgir stare at the Plantagenet flag, his initial contempt replaced by frustrated rage. Unable to fathom the defenders' tenacity as night fell, I heard him growl, "Cease the attack. Fall back to camp." I knew he needed to regroup and reassess this difficult target. As the retreat horn sounded, I watched the Solon army withdraw, leaving behind a field of corpses and broken weapons. The battered defenders let out a weary, hollow cheer, and I could see they were exhausted beyond measure. I watched Governor William, leaning on his notched sword, steady his trembling frame with his son's help. I observed him watching the retreating enemy with deep, furrowed concern. I knew he understood this victory was temporary. The enemy would return with greater ferocity at dawn. Yet, I felt that he and his people had proven a point to the kingdom. Not everyone would bow to the barbarians. I realized there were still spines of steel in this land. Though the walls were broken, I saw their spirit remained high. The next day, before dawn, I saw the sky hold only a faint glimmer. The Solon camp's horns blared, piercing the morning mist and waking the exhausted defenders, myself included. I knew the Solonians had spent the night preparing, gathering more troops and supplies. I watched a crude catapult being pushed to the front, its shadow looming over the damaged walls. I saw more scaling ladders and reinforced battering rams being deployed. The Tiger Legion soldiers, fueled by overnight rest and bloodlust, hungered for slaughter, as I could clearly see. Like a pack of starving wolves, I watched them surround Ward Town once more. The defenders had spent the night patching walls with sandbags and timber, but I felt these efforts seemed fragile against the new siege engines. I saw every soldier wearing a mask of exhaustion, waiting for the end. I knew they understood yesterday's miracle was unlikely to repeat. Today would be a desperate, bloody struggle. I saw Governor William, clad in blood-stained armor, standing at the most dangerous section of the ramparts. His eyes were sharp as an eagle's, and I could tell his mind was detached from his own survival. His son, William Jr., and 16-year-old grandson stood by him, trembling but resolute, as I observed. "Prepare for battle." I heard William's voice, though hoarse, ring out with unwavering authority. The battle erupted as I watched a catapult stone shatter a section of the wall, burying several defenders. This time, I saw the Solonians launch a methodical, lethal assault, focusing fire on the wall's weakest points. I watched a dense rain of arrows suppress the defenders while infantry rushed the walls with scaling ladders under shield cover. I saw the defenders fight back with stones, logs, and their dwindling supply of hot oil. I watched archers risk their lives to fire back at the swarming enemy. However, I knew the disparity in strength was cruel and insurmountable. With casualties mounting and supplies nearly exhausted, I realized the defenders were reaching their limit. The Solonians, seemingly endless, surged forward over the bodies of their fallen comrades, as I witnessed. Boom! I watched a massive impact collapse a section of the wall, creating a wide, gaping hole. The breach. They're through. I heard the defenders cry in despair. I watched the Solon soldiers howl and pour into the town like a broken dam. Hold the line. Spearmen, forward. I heard William Jr. scream, leading his elite guards into a brutal melee at the breach. I saw blades clash and spears thrust. The ground at the breach turned into a bloody mire. Once the breach was made, I knew collapse was inevitable. I watched more Solonians flood in through the breach and over the walls via ladders. I saw the defenders surrounded and cut down in isolated pockets. I realized the wall defense had effectively crumbled. Governor, the walls are lost. We must retreat into the town. I heard a bloodied officer shout. I watched William survey the collapsing front. The defense was being devoured. I inhaled the scent of smoke and blood, knowing the final moment had arrived. Abandon the walls. Fall back into the town. Fight street by street. For the kingdom, no surrender. I heard him command. I watched the survivors retreat into the complex maze of Wardtown streets. I knew they understood every corner, but the true hell was only just beginning. I watched the Solonians seize the walls and force the gates, their main force surging into the town. I watched as the Solonians, who had expected submissive civilians and easy loot, were met with vengeful arrows instead. I observed deadly projectiles raining from attics, shadows, and gutters, piercing the poorly armored Solon soldiers. I saw bricks, pots, and boiling water being hurled from rooftops. I watched the defenders charge from cellars and doorways, grappling with enemies to deliver lethal stabs with daggers. This was Governor William's urban warfare, using every inch of familiar terrain to bleed the enemy and buy time. I saw the battle turn brutal, chaotic, and prolonged. I watched as narrow streets became death traps while combat spilled into homes and courtyards. I saw the defenders use their knowledge of the terrain to launch hit-and-run attacks, inflicting heavy casualties on the superior Solonian numbers. I witnessed Solon soldiers being frequently ambushed by rooftop attackers or hidden cellar archers after they assumed an area was clear. Yet, I knew that against overwhelming force, tactics had limits. Losing patience, Asgir ordered his men to set fire to the houses, flushing out the defenders with smoke and flames. Soon, I saw Wardtown engulfed in massive blazes. I heard wooden structures crackle as fire and smoke consumed the streets. I watched as many defenders burned to death, while others were forced out only to be slaughtered by Solonian blades. I saw Governor William and his final dozen men retreat, losing soldiers with every step. I watched them take their final stand in the William family ancestral home. The stone mansion, with its towers and oak doors, resembled a small castle to me. I saw William and his men hold the mansion stubbornly for a long time. I watched them fire arrows and drop stones from the towers, piling Solonian corpses before the gates. But I knew no fortress could withstand such overwhelming numbers indefinitely. I saw the Solonians bring up a battering ram, shielded by infantry, to assault the main gate. Each heavy thud sounded like a funeral knell to the defenders inside, and to me. As the doors groaned and dust fell, I saw despair spread among the survivors. I watched Governor William stand in the hall, listening to the approaching enemy, his expression strangely calm and relieved. I could see his mind drift back 3 years to his time as governor of the northern province. When Carnford was at its end, I knew a wounded veteran named Andre had begged him for reinforcements. I knew William, prioritizing French City and guarding his own strength, had coldly refused. I still remembered Andre's bloodshot eyes and his parting curse. "Governor, you will regret this betrayal." I heard William whisper to himself, "Andre, Lord Marcus, Perhaps this is the same isolation you felt at Carnford Castle. It is the retribution of fate. Boom. I saw the gate shatter, and the Solonians surge inside with roars of victory. "Father!" William Jr. cried, cutting down an enemy to defend his father. "Stay back," the governor commanded firmly. Looking at the encroaching enemies, I saw his eyes hold a final, peaceful resolve. I watched him place his notched knightly sword against his own throat. "Carnford, Marcus, Andre, and all those who died because of my cowardice," he murmured. "I pay for my sins with my blood and the blood of the William family." With a swift motion, I watched him end his life, fulfilling his oath of loyalty to the kingdom in his final, desperate act. I saw his body fall, soaking the mansion's carpet in warm blood. "Father!" "No!" William Jr. screamed, paralyzed by grief. As a Solonian soldier moved to strike the distracted son, I saw the 16-year-old boy lunge forward to push his father away. Flash! I watched the scimitar strike the boy's back, killing him instantly. Seeing his son die, I witnessed William Jr. suffer a total mental collapse. I heard him let out a beastly howl, his eyes turning blood red. "My family serves the crown. Today we die for the emperor. Kill!" I watched him charge into the crowd of Solonians, abandoning all defense. Fighting like a madman, I saw his reckless assault soon silenced by the enemy's blades. Moments later, I saw the governor's son lie dead beside his father, his eyes staring blankly at the smoke-blackened ceiling. With the death of 3 generations of the William family, I saw the resistance collapse. I watched the remaining defenders get killed or executed, ending organized resistance in Ward Town. Ward Town had fallen. I saw the Solonians, especially the Tiger Legion, unleash their pent-up rage. I watched as Asgir allowed a brutal massacre to terrorize any future resistance. I saw that no one was spared, not the elderly, the women, or the infants. I watched soldiers kick in doors and slaughter the residents within. I heard the air filled with screams, laughter, and the sounds of carnage. I saw streets flow with blood and corpses pile high. The once prosperous border town became a charred, blood-soaked hellscape before my eyes. To further terrorize the region, I saw Asgir order Governor William's body to be hoisted on a spear above the ruined city gate. I watched the governor's silver hair flutter in the wind as crows picked at his remains. I heard news of the massacre spread like a plague through the northern frontier. It served as a bloody warning to the Plantagenet kingdom of the cost of resisting Solon. I believe Governor William and his people upheld their noble dignity with their final, defiant sacrifice. Solon's overwhelming force and calculated terror policy bred deep despair across the region, which I witnessed firsthand. The Northern Territory's sky grew dark with smoke and blood, and I saw no hope of reprieve for the land. The fall of Ward Town and the tragic end of Governor William and his family spread like a plague. Fueled by refugee cries and Solon's psychological warfare, I watched it rapidly engulf the field territory and spread toward the kingdom's heartland. This strike hit the capital, the wealthy field city, known as the Gold Basin, which I knew to be a vital target. When Asgir arrived with his Tiger Legion, emboldened by greed, I observed that he did not immediately assault the city as he had at Ward Town. Emulating his brother Harold, I saw Asgir employ a more insidious tactic. He had Governor William's rotting, crow-pecked remains transported to a prominent spot before the city walls, a sight I found truly gruesome. Mounted on a high spear, the corpse served as a warning that I saw strike fear into every defender and official regarding the former governor's fate. The sight of the silver hair, shattered armor, and mangled body was deeply traumatic, even to me. Simultaneously, I watched as survivors from the Wardtown massacre were driven to the front lines. Under threat of Solon blades, I heard them tearfully recount the slaughter, burning, and butchery they had witnessed. Their hollow eyes and hysterical screams shattered morale more effectively than any war drum, a phenomenon I noted with grim clarity. The tactic was, as I observed, devastatingly effective. The city's commander, Sir Elmer, was a distant cousin of the Duke of Field, a fact I was well aware of. Pampered and inexperienced, I judged that he lacked the iron will required for war. Seeing William's fate and hearing of the hell at Ward Town, I watched his sense of duty and honor vanish, replaced by pure terror. The city's officials and wealthy elite, mostly self-interested merchants, were equally paralyzed by fear, as I observed from my vantage point. Voices for resistance were quickly drowned out by calls for surrender, which I heard echoing through the halls. "Surrender is the only way to save our people," a counselor pleaded, a sentiment I heard repeated throughout the city. "Our walls are untested, and our troops untrained. How can we resist the Tiger Legion?" Another noble added, confirming my assessment of their cowardice. Merchants, fearing for their assets, prioritized survival above all else, as I clearly saw. I watched as Elmer's psychological defenses collapsed entirely. Without proper military preparation, I saw him consult the wealthy merchants and decide to surrender unconditionally. Thus, one of the Plantagenet Kingdom's wealthiest cities, filled with treasure and thousands of people, opened its gates without a single arrow fired, a moment I recorded with disbelief. I watched the demoralized garrison lay down their arms in the square. Officials and nobles, dressed in their finest, knelt along the road with keys and ledgers, humbly welcoming Asgir and his Tiger Legion, a scene I observed with disgust. Asgir watched from his horse with a cruel, triumphant smile, which I noted carefully. Taking this jewel of the field territory without a fight was a greater achievement than 10 ward towns, as I knew Asgir believed. While he technically honored his vague promise to avoid a large-scale massacre, I knew it was no act of mercy. Order ceased to exist the moment the Solonians entered, as I witnessed. The Tiger Legion's barbaric nature erupted, their long-suppressed greed unleashed before my eyes. While organized mass killing was avoided, I saw spontaneous, uncontrollable atrocities spread through every corner of the city. Asgir prioritized the systematic looting of the city's immense wealth, a process I observed him directing. He occupied the Duke's mansion, the town hall, guild headquarters, and the vaults of all major merchants, which I saw him seize. The following days saw the most thorough pillaging in the city's history, which I documented. Gold and silver coins were hauled from cellars, and hidden caches, loaded onto carts as I watched. Mountains of silk, spices, porcelain, and jewelry were seized, with lesser goods trampled underfoot, a sight I witnessed repeatedly. Public and private granaries were emptied, with grain and salted meat sent to the Solon camp, as I observed. Livestock was driven off, and even fine furniture, art, and carpets were stripped from mansions, which I saw happening everywhere. Asgir organized a massive transport train of captives and laborers to haul the loot back to his northern base, an operation I monitored. The wealth of generations was stripped in days, destroying the city's economic lifeblood, as I sadly noted. Meanwhile, I saw rank-and-file soldiers engage in uncontrolled violence against civilians. While the leadership took the treasury, I saw the soldiers squeeze the commoners. Using pretexts like searching for enemies, I watched them break into every home and shop. The definition of resistance was expanded indefinitely, as I observed from the soldiers' actions. Anyone hiding food, screaming in fear, or showing hatred was executed on the spot, a brutality I witnessed firsthand. Soldiers ransacked homes, stealing everything from jewelry to a single bag of flour, as I saw. What they couldn't take, they smashed, and I saw women subjected to horrific abuse. Pleas for mercy only led to death. I heard the streets echo with screams and the soldiers' laughter. Families were shattered, their lives' work stolen, and their loved ones killed or violated, a tragedy I bore witness to. Field City had been transformed from a paradise into a hell of chaos and death, as I saw with my own eyes. Having drained the city, I observed that Asgir did not stop. Leaving a small garrison behind, I watched him lead his well-supplied, fanatical Tiger Legion to sweep through the rest of the territory. Terrified by the fate of Ward Town and Field City, I saw other towns surrender immediately, offering tribute to survive. The entire field territory, once the kingdom's granary and treasury, became a mere supply depot for the Solonians, as I observed. Simultaneously, I received reports that Prince Harold's main force achieved brilliant results on another front. Bypassing Pussin Castle, I learned they struck the undefended northwest, seizing towns and enslaving the population. With the collapse of the field territory, I saw other Solon units like the Hound, Sword, and Rain Legions break through the border defenses. Like starving wolves, I watched them surge into the eastern plains, competing to loot the remaining riches. Northern and central Plantagenet fell into total anarchy, which I witnessed. Solon cavalry rampaged while I saw the kingdom's army flee or hide in isolated strongholds. Burning fields and fleeing refugees marked the landscape, as I watched the shadow of death smother the once peaceful land. The Plantagenet kingdom was in ruins, with despair widespread. Within the city of Play, the atmosphere was suffocating. I watched Friedrich and Sir Kalen stand on the battlements, observing distant smoke and hearing cries, their hearts heavy with grief. They knew the Solonians were ravaging the land. I could see that Friedrich was filled with agony and rage. He repeatedly petitioned King Heinrich XI to lead the cavalry out to strike the Solonians and rescue the people. "Your Majesty, we cannot watch them slaughter our people. Give me 500 riders, and I will pledge my life to bring back the heads of their leaders." Friedrich pleaded, his voice trembling. Yet, Heinrich XI stubbornly refused every request. "Sir Friedrich, I admire your loyalty. But the royal capital is the foundation of the kingdom. If you leave and fail, who will defend it? What of the hundreds of thousands here?" The king consistently used this logic to suppress Friedrich's fervor. In truth, I knew Heinrich was terrified of the Solonians and cared only for holding the city of Play, abandoning the countryside to its fate. I watched Friedrich helplessly as Solonians returned with loot. Refugees were slaughtered outside the walls, and the kingdom was ravaged. This impotence was more agonizing than battle. He could only clench his fists as the Solonians reached my water-rich lands at Franklin. I had prepared, using my inland river fleet and the terrain to build a solid defense. The Solon cavalry's mobility was hindered by the wetlands. They were repelled by my navy and coastal defense force with significant losses. Seeing the southern terrain unfavorable and their primary looting goals met, Harold wisely abandoned the southern push. By late December of Heinrich Schee's 7th year, the northern territory's harsh winter had frozen the rivers. The Solonians, needing to transport their massive spoils back to their tribes, prepared to end their campaign. The Feast of Plunder was nearing its end. The Solon army, laden with loot and slaves, began to retreat toward the northern passes. For the Plantagenet kingdom, the disaster was ending, but for Conford, the final, cruel reckoning was just beginning. To ensure a safe retreat, the Solonians intended to eliminate the thorns still hindering their path. Conford was the most prominent thorn in Harold's side. By late December, the months-long Solon raid reached its conclusion. Under Harold's orders, the scattered Solon legions began converging on a designated assembly point. This was Abo Town, roughly 100 miles southwest of the city of Play. Over the next few days, Abo Town transformed into a massive, chaotic military camp and open-air market. Endless columns of Solon cavalry and infantry arrived, escorting heavy, creaking supply wagons. The wagons were filled with spoils from countless towns and warehouses. Crates of gold and silver coins, jewelry, and antiques were piled high. Sacks of grain, barrels of wine, and bundles of fur and silk were stacked like common cargo. Even larger were the herds of livestock. Tens of thousands of pigs, horses, and cattle created a deafening roar and clouds of dust. Solon cavalrymen cracked whips to maintain order amidst the chaos. Most shocking was the silent, massive column of captured Plantagenet civilians. Mostly young and able-bodied, they had been chained together like cattle. Ragged and starving, they carried the very loot stolen from their own homes, their faces masks of despair. This line of nearly 100,000 slaves stretched endlessly, destined for a life of misery in the frozen north. The local lord's castle in Abo Town had changed hands. The Wolfhead battle flag now flew from the tower, signaling the conqueror's authority. Harold had claimed the former lord's hall as his residence. A massive stone fireplace crackled with pine logs, warming the room against the northern chill. The air smelled of pine, roasted meat, leather, and metal. Harold stood before a large arched window, silently observing the scene below. Outside, soldiers caroused, counting and fighting over the mountains of loot. Harold's expression remained cold and hard in the firelight as he surveyed the stolen wealth and captive artisans. His brothers, Sven and Isgir, stood behind him, satisfied with the campaign's success. Sven's Bear Legion had worked with the Wolf Legion to conquer several fortresses in the northwest. Asgir had shown brilliance, leading the Tiger Legion to strike deep into the field territory. Through psychological warfare, he forced the wealthy city of Field to surrender without a fight, opening the heart of the kingdom. Both brothers had become indispensable to Harold. They spoke in low, excited tones, reveling in their victory. Harold was deeply satisfied with the campaign's outcome. The haul included millions of pounds of grain, nearly 1 million gold coins in value of luxury goods, and tens of thousands of livestock. Most importantly, they had captured nearly 100,000 slaves. These people would replenish the Solan labor force, allowing more warriors to focus solely on conquest. However, the victory came at a cost, with casualties slightly higher than expected. At Old Osric Castle, the Knight Friedrich's resistance had cost them 500 elite Solonians and 2,000 surrendered troops. Later, reinforcements from Franz City engaged the besiegers, killing another 500 Solan cavalry. This allowed Friedrich to link up with reinforcements and engage Harold's forces at the royal capital, resulting in further losses of 500 cavalry. Despite local losses, I viewed the overall campaign success as a net gain. I learned that Ulf's Sparrow Legion had suffered heavy casualties at Confort. This forced Ulf to divert troops from the siege of Franz City and his rearguard to reinforce Confort, allowing Count Rochefort to pull cavalry from Franz City to rescue Old Osric Castle and the royal capital. Ulf, a cold glint flashed in my eyes. With the Sparrow Legion weakened and Ulf's prestige diminished, I saw a perfect opportunity to reduce their share of the spoils and suppress the increasingly arrogant commander. To me, trading a few soldiers for internal power consolidation was a profitable exchange. As I plotted, a personal guard in elite Solan leather armor entered, kneeling to present a letter sealed with special wax. Great Chieftain, urgent report from Frostguard. I took the letter, my brow twitching. I suspected the Plantagenet remnants from the Iron Islands were raiding the coast, taking advantage of the depleted defenses caused by Ulf's troop movements. I broke the seal and scanned the parchment. The report confirmed my fears. Plantagenet forces from the Iron Islands had seized several coastal forts and towns, looting supplies and burning villages. The remaining garrison was forced to retreat to key strongholds and requested the main army return to crush the raiders. I handed the letter to Sven without emotion. Sven read it and passed it to Asgir with a sneer. A bunch of stray dogs. Sven scoffed. They only dare to scavenge while we are deep in the south. If not for our lack of ships, we would have wiped them out already. This is no threat to the big picture. Asgir agreed, viewing the raids as a minor nuisance. Sven turned to me, adding, "Brother, this is Ulf's fault. If he hadn't wasted troops at Conford, the coast wouldn't be so vulnerable. He must be punished." I nodded approvingly. "Well thought, Sven. Ulf deserves punishment for the rear's vulnerability," I said calmly. "But we will settle that once we return to the north with our glory. Before that, we must pull the thorn that is Conford. They are far more dangerous than those island rats. We will crush them on our way back." I raised my voice. "Order our warriors to rest for 3 days under the walls of the Plantagenet capital. Enjoy the wine and spoils, and recover our full strength." I turned with an imposing air. Then, we marched north to level Conford. "Yes, brother," Sven and Asgir replied excitedly. For the next few days, the area around Abo town was filled with the scent of roasted meat and cheap wine as my Solan soldiers celebrated their victory. Meanwhile, the captured Plantagenets huddled in cold camps, shivering while eating moldy black bread. Days later, the refreshed Solan army began its journey north. The massive column of supply wagons, livestock, and slaves stretched for miles, moving slowly but with an arrogant display of power. I deliberately chose a route that paraded past the outskirts of Play City. Heinrich XI and his garrison watched from the walls as the column crawled by. The endless line of wagons and the sea of enslaved Plantagenet countrymen felt like knives in the hearts of the observers. Overwhelmed by shame and rage, the soldiers cried out, "Your Majesty, attack! We cannot let the barbarians leave like this." "Yes, Majesty, let us charge and rescue our people." Heinrich XI gripped the battlements, his face pale. He wanted to strike, but logic dictated otherwise. With thousands of Solon cavalry guarding the column, a field battle would be suicidal. He suppressed his urge and ordered, "Tell Count Eisenberg at Eagle's Nest Fortress to intercept the Solonians and reclaim some of our people and wealth." The order was hollow. It reached Count Eisenberg at Eagle's Nest. Eisenberg dared not challenge my main force, yet he could not openly defy the king. He sent small cavalry detachments to follow at a safe distance, pretending to monitor the enemy while effectively escorting them away. Friedrich and Sir Kalen watched this display from the walls, burning with fury. "Cowards! A bunch of cowards!" Sir Kalen punched the wall. Friedrich stared coldly at the retreating column, his heart filled with hatred for the corrupt bureaucracy and the cowardly Eisenberg. He felt helpless. As he watched the slaves at the end of the column, a face flashed in his mind. His brother, currently besieged at Confort. Karl. Friedrich's heart tightened. He had a grim premonition. I would never tolerate a thorn like Confort on my path home. To secure my retreat, I would surely concentrate my forces to annihilate Confort. Friedrich's heart sank at the thought of his brother facing the full fury of the Solon army. He looked toward the north, toward the isolated fortress. "Karl, my brother," he prayed silently, his fists trembling. "You must survive." My Solon army, laden with blood-stained wealth and slaves, passed through Blackstone Pass and vanished into the northern horizon. At the governor's mansion in France City, a knock interrupted Count Rockefeller's thoughts. He sat behind his desk, smoking a pipe, his brow furrowed with heavy concern. "Enter," he said. His daughter, Charlotte, walked in, surprising him. Charlotte wore an elegant, lake blue silk gown that softened her usual martial appearance. Her golden hair was styled in an intricate bun, adding a touch of gentleness to her look. The Count rarely saw his daughter dressed so femininely. She usually preferred riding gear or simple dresses, only dressing formally for major ceremonies. He did not know that the gown's loose waist and heavy fabric were chosen to hide her slightly swelling abdomen. She and Aunt Martha had prepared this to conceal her pregnancy, as it became more noticeable. I watched Charlotte approach her father, Count Rockefort, with a soft, concerned inquiry about the state of the royal capital and Sir Kalen's return. The Count exhaled a cloud of smoke, unable to shake his inner gloom. He gestured for her to sit. Charlotte complied, her eyes fixed on his worried face. "Kalen has reported," the Count said hoarsely. "The siege is lifted. The Solonians are retreating north with their plunder." Charlotte felt no joy, only deeper concern. She understood the implications of the Solonian retreat. "Does this mean the Sparrow Legion will leave France City?" she asked, though her true concern lay elsewhere. The Count nodded and shook his head. "For France City, yes. Ulf will leave to join Harold's main force, but—" he looked toward the northern horizon, his voice dropping. "For another place, the true catastrophe is just beginning." Charlotte's heart sank. Her fingers tightened on her dress as she trembled. "Father, do you mean Confort? Is it?" "Karl." The Count turned to look at her. He saw the undisguised anxiety and fear in her eyes. Recognizing the look of a woman deeply in love, he realized his daughter had given her heart to the young lord in the northern frontier. He sighed, deciding to be honest. "Yes, Charlotte. The Solonians will not tolerate Confort remaining as a thorn in their side. Harold will surely crush Confort on his way north to ensure no future threats remain. It is inevitable." He filled his pipe, feeling powerless. "We can do nothing. The Sparrow Legion is still outside our walls. Eisenberg is a coward, and the royal capital is exhausted. Karl von Schmidt and his small Confort are now truly alone, facing the full wrath of the Solonian army." Every word struck Charlotte like a hammer, leaving her pale and breathless. Despite her premonitions, the blunt reality left her dizzy. She touched her abdomen, feeling the stirrings of the life within. "It was my child, perhaps my only legacy." "No, it can't be," she said, tears forming. "Karl is strong. He has performed miracles before. He can do it again, right, father?" The Count felt a deep, aching pity for his daughter. He admired me, but as a commander, he knew that personal valor could not overcome such a massive disparity in strength. Confort was facing the main, battle-hardened Solonian force, not a mere detachment. He couldn't bear to crush her hope further, So he patted her hand gently. Yes, Karl is a man of surprises. We must have faith. Perhaps there will be a turn of events. His words remained heavy with doubt. Charlotte bowed her head, tears falling onto her dress. She knew his comfort was hollow. Silence filled the office, broken only by the city's distant noise and her suppressed sobs. The Count watched her, filled with complex emotions and deep worry for her future. Half a month later, at Conford, a bitter winter wind howled across the desolate northern hills. The atmosphere over Conford was suffocating. I stood on the highest watchtower, scanning the horizon with my telescope. Even I, a veteran of countless battles, felt a tremor of shock. 100,000 soldiers. The valley, plains, and hills were blanketed by gray tents, supply wagons, and Solonian wolf banners. The camp stretched endlessly, with countless figures moving like ants. The sheer number of Solonians was terrifying, turning the horizon into a sea of enemies. A low, constant hum of thousands of men and horses vibrated through the very stones beneath my feet. Smoke from campfires choked the sky, dimming the sun. This was Harold's true power. The entire Solonian tribe, mobilized in fury to erase the fortress that had humiliated them. It was a force meant to crush us into oblivion. Conrad lowered his telescope, his face pale with dread. I knew Harold's main force would be large, but seeing this, it is overwhelming. Karl, what is your plan? I sighed, looking at the ocean of enemies. Plan? I said softly. There is no retreat and no trick left. We must hold the line, rely on our walls, our soldiers' courage, and a bit of luck to stall them. I looked at Conrad. But we both know Conford cannot withstand an assault of 100,000 alone. The key to victory lies outside. The king's reinforcements, Count Rockefort's potential strike, or perhaps internal strife among the Solonians. Until then, we must be the hardest nail, holding our ground and waiting for a change in fortune. Conrad nodded silently, understanding. It was a suicide mission, but we would fight for our dignity and the slim hope of survival. I walked down to the main wall's command post. Brendan, Richter, Roland, and Leon were gathered, their faces grim as they watched the horizon. I turned to the experienced Brendan. Brendan, the situation is clear. In your view, how should we respond? Brendan pointed to the vast Solon army camp, noting their tenfold numerical advantage. Harold intends to crush us with sheer force. Our mission to stall the Ulf Corps is complete. Holding this outer wall is now strategically pointless and will only waste our troops against their initial assault. I propose we abandon the outer defenses and retreat to the main castle on the mountain. Its height and thick walls will negate their numbers. Consolidating our forces is the only way to survive. Every soldier's life is too precious to waste on a lost position. I agreed immediately. Your judgment matches mine. There is no glory in a futile stand. We must preserve our strength for a prolonged defense in the fortress. I turned to Edgar and Maul. Organize the residents of the outer villages and shanties. Abandon all non-essentials and evacuate to the inner castle immediately. Implement a scorched earth policy. Burn the grain, poison or fill the wells, and destroy all workshops and houses. Leave nothing for the Solonians. Edgar and Maul saluted and hurried off to execute my orders. I addressed Leon and Thorstein. Bring all cavalry and horses into the inner castle. Utilize the plazas, stables, and even the space before the main hall. If space is tight, let the soldiers rotate rest in my main hall. We have no room for formalities in these times. Leon and Thorstein were stunned. Bringing horses into the core fortress and opening my hall to common soldiers was unprecedented. It was a desperate measure, yet I hoped it demonstrated my resolve to live and die alongside my men. Deeply moved, they saluted. I then turned to Brendan, Richter, and Roland. Brendan, Richter, Roland, I said, you have the most critical task. I pointed to the outer wall. We must abandon it, but not without leaving Harold a parting gift. I marked key structural points, gates and corners, where the enemy would likely congregate. We will secretly plant satchel charges here. Our troops will put up a symbolic defense, then feign defeat and retreat to the inner castle, making the Solonians believe they won the wall through sheer force. Once they occupy the wall in celebration, their elite vanguard and officers will crowd the ramparts. That is when we trigger the explosives. I gestured a massive explosion. We will give our noble leader Harold a fireworks, show he will never forget. The officers were stunned by the audacity of my plan, followed by a surge of excitement. Brendan responded first. It's feasible. We have 3,000 pounds of gunpowder from Count Rockefort, enough for massive charges. Success will not only decimate their vanguard and cause chaos, but also shatter their morale, giving us a psychological edge for the inner defense. Yes, let them taste their own spoils, Richter added. Even the stoic Conrad looked at his brother with newfound disbelief. It's decided. I commanded. Brendan, oversee the mining. Richter and Roland, handle the feigned retreat. Make it convincing. Harold observed my castle from afar, flanked by his tribal chiefs. Even he had to admit the fortress was naturally formidable. Built against a cliff with steep ridges on both sides, it was nearly impregnable. The only approach was a narrow, 2-meter-wide path, a death trap exposed to my muskets and cannons. The stone castle itself looked equally impenetrable. A good location, Harold sneered. But the commander is a fool. Why defend the outer wall instead of concentrating on the mountain fortress? Wasting troops to protect mere huts and fields? He has surrendered his greatest tactical advantage for crumbs. Harold believed I had made a fatal strategic error by splitting my forces. This would make the siege far easier for him. If they want to die, I will oblige, Harold decided. He would not bother with probes or slave fodder tactics. He would use overwhelming force to wipe this fortress off the map. He would show the Plantagenet people that resistance meant total annihilation. At noon, 1,000 elite Solon infantry, fueled by meat and ale, were at peak morale. They were eager for battle, confident that the thin outer wall would fall easily. A wild horn blast shattered the silence. For the great leader, kill the Plantagenet bastards. Charge. Flatten Carnford. 1,000 Solon soldiers roared, carrying scaling ladders and battering rams toward my outer wall. The ground shook as my defenders stood ready. Under my calm orders, the musketeers lined up, aiming their weapons at the surging tide. First rank. Aim. Fire. Second rank. Aim. Fire. Volleys of musket fire erupted, shrouding the wall in white smoke. The front line of Solon soldiers fell like wheat. Their wooden shields were useless against the lead balls, which tore through them and the men behind. Screams drowned out the war cries, and the Solon advance stalled. Archers followed, raining arrows down on the enemy. Though less lethal than muskets, the arrows caused significant casualties. Driven by their officers and execution squads, the Solonians pushed forward despite the losses. Their archers returned fire, striking the battlements and wounding some of my men. Then, something inexplicable happened. After the light exchange, my musketeers suddenly broke formation and fled from the wall, as if terrified by the minor skirmish. I watched as the Solon soldiers stood stunned, unable to believe their eyes as the defenders fled. The resistance had ended abruptly, but I saw the Solonians seize the fleeting opportunity. They quickly reached the walls and raised their scaling ladders, shouting orders to occupy the ramparts. I watched the Solon soldiers swarm up the ladders with agile speed. The few remaining defenders offered only token resistance, dropping logs and stones that caused minor chaos. Overwhelmed, the defenders soon retreated along the walls, joining the main force fleeing toward the mountain castle. The process was unexpectedly smooth. I observed the Solon vanguard seize the outer walls almost bloodlessly. I noticed the last Plantagenet soldier to leave pause briefly at the wall's base to fumble with something before sprinting toward the mountain. I saw the Solon soldiers on the wall look at each other in confusion. It had taken less than half an hour to capture the wall, with only dozens of casualties. It was a far cry from the bloody battle I had anticipated, leaving the wall in an eerie, wind-swept silence. The soldiers stood motionless, and I stared with them at the empty wall and the nearby castle. Suddenly, cheers erupted. We won. The walls are ours. The Plantagenets are terrified. Euphoria spread as the news was relayed back to the main army. The Solon army surged forward, eager to claim credit for the easy victory. The walls became packed with jubilant soldiers, oblivious to the impending danger. No one noticed the burning fuses in the shadows, inching toward 2,000 pounds of gunpowder buried beneath the wall's foundation. I watched Harold sit on his horse, observing his cheering troops with a sense of unease. Despite the easy victory, I could see a dark premonition clouding his mind. He reasoned that the commander must have realized the low walls were indefensible and retreated to the mountain castle to preserve strength. He was dissatisfied that he hadn't inflicted more casualties during the wall defense. However, he figured it would make the final assault on the core castle easier. Just as Harold opened his mouth to order the final assault, a massive roar erupted from Carnford. The explosion was deafening, shaking the very ground beneath me and Harold. I watched in horror as the section of the wall occupied by Harold's troops suddenly bulged and disintegrated. A volcanic eruption of dust and debris swallowed the wall, tossing his soldiers into the air like ragdolls. Shattered bricks and timber rained down like hail. This was only the beginning. I saw a chain reaction of explosions follow. The blasts tore along the wall, spreading from the center outward. The entire wall section shuddered and collapsed, resembling a dying stone dragon. The scene on the wall was gruesome. The dense ranks of Solon soldiers were caught completely off guard, decimated by the subterranean blasts. Those near the center were obliterated, leaving no trace behind. Only fragments of weapons and clothing rained down like black snow. Those further away were thrown from the walls or struck by flying debris. Screams and the sound of collapse plunged the attacking force into total panic. I saw Harold's horse rear in terror, nearly throwing him. He regained his seat, his triumph replaced by shock and blinding rage. His mind went blank, filled only with the ringing in his ears and the screams of his dying men. I watched his elite vanguard vanish in a cruel, spectacular display of fire. It took over 10 seconds for Harold to recover his senses. A bone-chilling cold washed over me as I watched him. This was followed by volcanic fury and a hidden, gnawing fear. It was a premeditated trap. The defenders had used the wall and the victory as bait. Harold's face turned livid, his veins bulging with rage. He cursed the Carnford commander for the trap that had cost him so dearly. He realized too late that the easy abandonment of the wall was a calculated, vicious lure. Intense regret and self-reproach flooded his heart. His own arrogance and underestimation of his opponent had doomed his elite warriors. The blow to his army's morale would be catastrophic. I looked at his officers, who stood pale and trembling, paralyzed by the sight of what looked like divine retribution. These fearless warriors were now gripped by terror of an unknown power. They felt small and powerless against a force that could erase hundreds of men in an instant. Their martial skill meant nothing against the fire, while the castle erupted in triumphant cheers. "Long live Lord Carl! Blow those bastards to hell," the defenders shouted. The soldiers who had just fled were now mocking the Solonians from the inner castle walls. Their cheers felt like a slap in the face to every Solon soldier. I watched Harold clench his fists until his knuckles cracked. He stared at the castle, his eyes locking onto me, the man who had orchestrated his humiliation. Though they had never met, Harold recognized the man instantly by instinct. It was I, Karl von Schmidt, the Lord of Carnford, the culprit behind his repeated failures. Rage surged, and Harold gripped his reins so hard his knuckles turned white. He longed to charge and crush me and my castle into dust. Yet, he knew better. His army's morale was shattered, and a blind attack would only invite further disaster. Taking a deep breath to suppress his fury, he ordered in a cold, steady voice, "Retreat. Cease the attack, return to camp, tend to the wounded, and regroup. We discuss tomorrow." Without another glance at the ruined walls, he turned his horse and rode toward the main camp, followed by his shaken generals. His silhouette appeared heavy and desolate under the pale winter sun. On the ramparts, I watched the burly figure retreat, surrounded by his guards. Even at a distance, the man's broad shoulders and upright posture radiated a heavy, oppressive aura. This was my first time seeing Harold, the barbarian leader who had terrorized the Plantagenet kingdom. Though strangers, I had studied Harold's campaigns extensively. During the Grey Wolf Forest battle, Harold, then a frontline commander, had led his elite berserkers in a direct, fearless charge against a well-defended Plantagenet position. He shattered the superior kingdom forces, causing the entire Western army to collapse. That victory relied on sheer ferocity, superior soldiers, and decisive leadership rather than trickery. That direct, brutal style left a deep impression on me. Furthermore, Harold's political acumen after succeeding the Solon tribe leadership was undeniable. He stabilized internal strife and resource scarcity, consolidating the tribes into a more aggressive force. These feats proved Harold was no mere brute, but a formidable, well-rounded opponent. I could clearly sense the suppressed rage radiating from that distant figure. I smirked. This was our first true duel, and I had taught the eagle of the northern frontier a lesson in underestimating his foe. The tuition was the hundreds of corpses left beneath my walls. As Harold vanished into the dust, my smirk faded. I knew this victory was merely a brief respite before the real storm. Harold's retreat was not a surrender, but a wounded beast licking its wounds to prepare for a deadlier counterattack. Next time, he would be more cautious and lethal. Rest well, Chief Harold, I murmured, turning to my exhausted but exhilarated soldiers. Conford will be waiting. Accompanied by my officers and officials, I descended from the walls. The outer city was a scene of extreme congestion. Makeshift tents and shacks packed the open spaces, filled with soldiers nursing wounds and eating rations, the air thick with sweat and smoke. Thanks to Maul's foresight, semi-underground bunkers provided shelter for the weary soldiers and displaced subjects. Civilians from nearby villages were currently scrambling into these limited spaces. Men carried meager belongings, women clutched crying infants, and the elderly hobbled along. The air was filled with shouts. Over here! Don't push! Where is my child? Let the elderly pass. The cacophony of crying children, arguing adults, and clattering goods was dizzying. People fought for space, terrified of being left without shelter. Luggage lay scattered, and soldiers struggled in vain to maintain order amidst the pushing crowds. I and my party navigated the chaos to reach the final gate leading to the inner city. The guards recognized me and opened the heavy gate, shutting out the outer city's clamor. The inner city was equally crowded, with over 100 warhorses crammed into expanded stables, the air heavy with the smell of manure and hay. Workshops were brightly lit, the sound of hammering constant as smiths repaired weapons and siege equipment. We finally reached the Lord's Hall, the heavy stone doors sealing out the world. The hall was quiet, save for the crackling fireplace, as the group sat around the long table. I skipped the pleasantries. Edgar, report our current resources. Edgar opened his ledger. My lord, we have 2,776 people. Excluding the elderly and children, we have about 1,400 men who have undergone basic military training over the last 2 months. Brendan added firmly. Including our core standing army, we have nearly 2,000 men ready for the walls. All weapons, including pitchforks, have been distributed, but armor is severely lacking. Most have only leather or simple padded armor. I replied calmly. If it comes to hand-to-hand combat, armor matters less than will and coordination. I looked at my commanders and made a bold decision. Promote the capable veterans and potential leaders on the spot. I authorize you 3 to handle all promotions below the company level without my prior approval. Just report the changes to me afterward. Brendan, Richter, and Roland exchanged shocked glances. Such delegation was unprecedented. It was a sign of extreme trust, but also a reflection of our dire situation. With the castle on the brink of collapse, rank mattered less than the ability to hold a position and keep men alive. Yes, my lord. They responded in unison, their voices resolute. They departed, the heavy oak doors closing behind them, muffling the sounds of the corridor. Silence returned to the council hall, marked only by the flickering torches. I was left alone. I leaned back, rubbing my aching temples in deep thought. Despite the tension outside, I remained remarkably calm. As a commander, I had no other choice. My decision to delegate officer promotion authority to my 3 subordinates was no impulsive act. At this moment, power held no meaning for me. With the impending slaughter of the siege, few would survive. Rank was irrelevant. I held little hope for holding Conford. Outside, Harold led 100,000 Solon soldiers, excluding 100,000 slave cannon fodder. Against this, I had barely 2,000 defenders. While a 50-to-1 ratio spelled certain defeat by military standards, I clung to the terrain as my only advantage. Conford's position was a natural fortress, backed by steep mountains with only one narrow corridor for access. A classic, one man guards the pass scenario. The Solonians could not deploy their massive numbers, forced to attack in small, staggered waves up the narrow path. This neutralized their numerical superiority, turning the battle into a war of attrition. Every assault would cost the Solonians dearly. Supplies were also better than expected. Thanks to Franz City's long-term support, the granaries and armories were well stocked. Reserves of gunpowder, lead bullets, and arrows were sufficient for a prolonged defense. Siege engines like boulders and logs were reinforced and ready. We had the means to make the Solonians bleed before running dry. Morale was our greatest weapon. Everyone in the castle knew there was no retreat. The abyss lay behind us. The Solonians' reputation for slaughter preceded them. Surrender meant death, while resistance offered a sliver of hope. This fight to the death mentality was more potent than any speech. We were cornered beasts, and our strength was not to be underestimated. Harold's position was less secure than it appeared. Despite his aggressive posture, he faced hidden weaknesses. He could not afford to stall 100,000 men indefinitely at a barren mountain fortress. Having plundered the wealthy inner pass, he had mountains of loot to secure. This wealth needed to be returned to the northern tribes to satisfy greed and consolidate his authority. Time was not on his side, and the internal state of his army was shifting. They were no longer desperate, penniless outlaws. Now, every soldier was laden with stolen goods and slaves. Possessions made men fear death. Would they still fight with the same fanaticism for a worthless, blood-soaked rock like Conford? Conford was a bone that offered no meat but could shatter the attacker's teeth. Harold might force a few fierce assaults with his authority, but if the battle stalled and casualties mounted, resentment and fear would spread like a plague. Harold would then face immense internal pressure. My resolve hardened. Hold. Time is on our side. Every day we hold, Harold's pressure grows, his morale drops, and the chance for a turning point elsewhere increases. I absent-mindedly stroked the smooth oak armrest of my high-backed chair. A sudden thought struck me. Had Lord Marcus sat in this very chair years ago, facing the same Solonian threat and the same desperate isolation? I imagined Marcus, under the flickering firelight, agonizing over maps and survival, weighing every decision. History seemed to be repeating its cruel cycle, placing different commanders in the same seat against identical odds. Yet, the previous cycle ended in tragedy. Marcus failed, and Conford fell. Would my own efforts lead to a different outcome, or merely another prologue to tragedy? Only the coming blood and fire would provide the answer. After 3 days of silence, the Solon horns sounded again. Harold shifted tactics, employing a cold, efficient attrition strategy. Thousands of captured Plantagenet civilians and soldiers were driven to the front by the Solon execution squad. They were gaunt, ragged, and paralyzed with terror. Harold addressed them in Solon, translated into Plantagenet. Listen, the great chief offers you a chance to live. Charge the walls. Bring back 1 brick each, and you get bread and broth. Anyone who returns empty-handed or retreats, he drew his scimitar, will be executed. The slaves were trapped between the enemy's arrows and their captors' blades. Driven by survival, they wailed and surged into the narrow, deadly corridor. Harold ordered a balanced force from his main battalions to test the defenses. 800 archers provided cover, followed by 500 heavy infantry ready to strike once the slaves exhausted the defenders. Over 1,000 Plantagenet civilians were forced into the vanguard. They were not entirely defenseless. Captured craftsmen had been forced to build crude shield carts. These carts were made of 25 cm, thick hardwood covered in raw cowhide, proof against current musket fire. Pushed by slaves on wooden wheels, they were sized to fit the narrow corridor perfectly. Other slaves followed, holding large shields overhead. These shields were layered with wet cowhide, mud, and soaked quilts to resist fire arrows and naphtha. Driven by whips and shouts, this grotesque procession crawled slowly toward the breach in Conford's wall. I watched the defenders on the walls, hardened by blood and battle, standing with faces like iron. Numbed to slaughter, They had long since traded emotion for mechanical obedience. My orders as commander were absolute. Mercy was a fatal poison in this siege. I observed them gripping their weapons, eyes locked on the approaching shield carts. Otto led a company of musketeers defending the wall above the left corridor. Promoted just yesterday from platoon leader for his composure, he now held command. His predecessor had been reassigned to lead a mixed unit of recruits and veterans. Feeling the weight of responsibility, Otto forced himself to remain calm, calculating the distance of the encroaching crowd. As the desperate vanguard reached the middle of the corridor, less than 100 meters from the wall, a horn blared. The long, piercing sound from the command tower cut through the battlefield's roar. Recognizing the signal for counterattack, Otto exhaled and roared. All units, aim, fire at will. The wall erupted in rhythmic, staccato gunfire rather than a single volley. Though his company had 60 musketeers and 40 archers, only about 20 muskets fired at once. My tactic prioritized cold, efficient sniping over wasteful mass volleys, aiming for 1 kill per bullet. 20 elite musketeers were designated as lead marksmen. Each lead marksman had 2 assistants to clean and reload spare muskets, ensuring constant fire. This 3-stage precision method I implemented sacrificed volume for accuracy and sustainability. The tactic proved devastating. Despite the shield carts, the slaves were picked off one by one. Lead balls found gaps in shields or struck the exposed limbs of those pushing the carts. Screams spread panic, and the advance slowed significantly. Simultaneously, the right flank opened fire, creating a lethal crossfire that acted like a reaper's scythe. Dozens fell, their bodies clogging the corridor as the survivors panicked behind their shields. The Solon soldiers' shouts and archery from the rear failed to maintain order. Primitive fear of an unseen, omnipresent death overwhelmed the slaves. The gunfire echoed like a death knell, each shot claiming a life. Casualties mounted, and the wails of the dying filled the air. The psychological toll broke the slaves' resolve. Some shrieked and fled, abandoning their shields and carts. They were immediately cut down by Solon archers in the rear, serving as a grim warning to the rest. The shield carts ground forward, wheels crushing blood-soaked corpses. A brutal slave leader, promised a position in the Solon army upon reaching Frostguard, beat the hesitant with a wooden club. Driven by the hope of shedding his slave status, he fought with fanatical zeal. He sought to pave his path to promotion with the blood of his peers. "Stay behind the carts. Don't run," he bellowed, trying to hold the formation. His loud commands drew the attention of my defenders. A defender archer took aim at the vocal leader. The bowstring hummed, and an arrow whistled through the air. It struck the leader in the mouth, piercing his brain. He collapsed instantly, his body hitting the mud. The leader's death shattered the remaining morale of the slaves. "The boss is dead," they cried, turning to flee. They were met by a volley of arrows from the Solon rear, killing the escapees instantly. "No retreat. Death to those who turn back," a Solon officer shouted. Trapped between my defenders' muskets and their own master's arrows, the slaves were doomed. Driven by survival instinct, they turned back, numbly pushing the carts toward the breach. As the defenders focused on the slaves, the Solonians saw their opening. A large force of Solon archers, having finished their formation, drew their bows on command. The sound of hundreds of bowstrings vibrating filled the air. A black cloud of arrows rained down upon the walls of Confort. "Shields up! Take cover!" Officers screamed as the arrows struck. Casualties mounted among my defenders. Several musketeers and archers were struck and fell from the wall. An arrow struck Otto's kettle hat with a loud clang, the impact rattling his skull. The high-quality steel deflected the shaft, leaving only a dent. Enraged, Otto ducked behind the battlement and roared, "First and third platoons. Target the enemy archers. Suppress them." The order was relayed instantly. My defenders braved the arrow rain to return fire at the distant Solon archer line. The battle escalated into a brutal exchange of long-range fire. Using their height advantage and my precision tactics, the musketeers picked off the Solon archers. The Solonians relied on sheer numbers to maintain their barrage. Wave after wave of arrows kept my defenders pinned, making any exposure lethal. The narrow space between us became a deadly corridor of flying lead and steel. I watched as the defenders and Solon archers traded fire. The defenders' muskets remained lethal, while the archers were quickly replaced as they fell. Otto gritted his teeth, knowing our only advantages were the wall's height and the musket's range. He knew we had to suppress the enemy's ranged units to hold the position. I observed the slaves suffering heavy casualties, their bodies piling up along the steep corridor like harvested wheat. I saw desperate slaves use the corpses of their comrades as meat shields against the deadly lead bullets, creating a gruesome scene of carnage. Driven by the Solon soldiers and the threat of archers behind them, I watched the meat shield formation crawl slowly toward the wall's breach. Pushed by the slaves, the heavy shield cart ground over blood and corpses, finally reaching the narrowest throat of the corridor before my eyes. The terrain was treacherous. I could see the accumulation of bodies and debris making the path uneven. I watched as the shield cart's wheels became wedged between a hidden pit and a jagged rock. Despite the slaves' frantic efforts, I heard the cart groan as it remained stuck. I watched a slave overseer curse and whip the exhausted men, forcing them to push harder. Just as the cart shifted, I saw a slave look up and freeze in terror. On the battlements, I watched two defenders operate a lever, pushing a massive, jagged boulder toward the edge. I saw the shadow of the boulder loom over the narrow passage like a death sentence. I watched the slave's mind go blank as the boulder plummeted. The rock thundered down the slope, and I watched it gain speed with every bounce. I heard the slave scream a half-formed warning. The boulder crushed the shield cart instantly, and I saw the heavy wooden frame shatter into splinters. It continued its path, plowing through the crowd of slaves behind the cart. The sound of breaking bones and crushed flesh filled the air around me. I saw at least 7 or 8 slaves instantly turn into pulp or killed by flying debris. Blood and gore painted the narrow passage in a horrific display of death before me. The boulder finally settled in the middle of the corridor, completely blocking the path. I watched the surviving slaves, witnessing the hellish scene, break down in terror. A long, somber retreat signal sounded from the Solon rear. Hearing the signal, I saw the slaves erupt in frantic, desperate cries, turning to flee towards safety. The narrow corridor turned into a lethal trap before my eyes. I watched those retreating collide with those still pushing forward, causing total chaos. Panic took hold. The sound of trampling, screaming, and breaking bones became deafening to me. I saw those who fell trampled by the surging crowd, never to rise again. The corridor became a bottleneck of living and dead, turning the retreat into a massacre. Otto watched the chaos calmly and ordered his men to cease fire to conserve ammunition. The officer on the right flank followed suit, and the firing stopped. We defenders rested, silently watching the tragedy below. I saw the slaves being crushed and trampled to death by their own side due to the narrow terrain and panic. The chaos lasted until the Solon execution squads arrived, using brutal force to clear the path. The remaining slaves fled back to the starting position, leaving the corridor filled with twisted corpses. A deathly silence fell over the battlefield. Only the lingering smoke and the stench of blood remained, marking the site of the brutal clash. Otto exhaled, his nerves relaxing slightly as he looked at his exhausted, numb soldiers. "The first round is over," he whispered, eyeing the Solon army's wolfhead banner. He knew a crueler test was coming. Night fell, and the Solon camp was lit, yet the atmosphere remained heavy and oppressive. From the slave camp, the chilling sounds of moaning and wailing drifted through the cold night air. The Solonians viewed the slaves as expendable, providing them with almost no medical care. The wounded were left to die in the freezing cold. Harold stood alone on a hill outside the main tent, struggling against the biting northern frontier wind. He gazed into the distance. Under the moonlight, I saw Conford Castle loom like a silent, black beast at the end of the pass. He stared at the blocked, blood-soaked corridor, his expression unreadable, though his eyes burned with inner turmoil. His high-ranking officers stood behind him in silence. The day's one-sided slaughter had deeply shaken them. The slaves hadn't even reached the walls before being decimated by our efficient firepower. The range, precision, and discipline of the Plantagenet muskets far exceeded their expectations. Asgier finally broke the silence, frustrated and fearful. "Brother, Conford is a hedgehog. If this path is this hard, who knows what other traps Carl has prepared? I've already counted arrows, caltrops, pits, spikes, and naphtha, not to mention the 3 mages who haven't even shown themselves yet. I watched as Sven noted the terrain's difficulty. Conford Mountain's 3 sides are near vertical cliffs, making troop deployment impossible. This is the only path, Sven added. They've blocked it with boulders. We'll have to use corpses to build a ramp just to advance. I observed him looking at Harold, his voice dropping. Brother, we have 100,000 slaves, but they aren't infinite. Today's losses have already caused grumbling among the legions. I watched Harold's eyes flicker in the torchlight. I saw how Sven and Isgir's words pierced his composure, striking his deepest anxieties. I realized the blood-paved road and Conford's unexpected resistance were eroding his iron will. In his memory, Conford had been conquered before. It had changed hands 3 times in his father's era and his own early campaigns. Yet, it had never been this grueling, like gnawing on a barbed anvil, losing teeth and blood for every inch gained. I knew he saw me as a devilish craftsman, turning Conford into a terrifying, spiked hedgehog. Frustration and curiosity boiled within him. Where did this Karl von Schmidt come from? His tactics are so devious. I watched a surrendered Plantagenet official bow. My lord, Karl is the 7th son of Duke Schmidt of the Franklin territory. He was sent here due to the Northern Frontier Expansion Decree. Duke Schmidt, Harold frowned, recalling the stubborn defense at the Franklin border that forced his retreat. So it's his son, no wonder. They are both equally troublesome at defense. I saw him recall the southern defense line, his assessment of me sharpening. The biting wind matched his heavy heart. He knew a frontal assault on Conford was a costly war of attrition. But Conford was no longer just a border fort. It was a thorn in the Solon's side, a gateway for the Plantagenet kingdom. My defensive ingenuity revealed a terrifying potential to him. Harold realized he must destroy me now, before I solidified my power and turned Conford into an impenetrable gate, which would cost 10 or 100 times more to break later. The arrow was already loose. The entire northern frontier was watching. Retreating would make him look weak, planting seeds of doubt in his warriors. If morale collapsed, his men would fear the Conford banner. He had to maintain the aura of Solon's invincibility, regardless of the cost in blood. This aura was the foundation of the Solon alliance, worth more than thousands of slaves. I watched him scan his legion commanders, who were watching him for signs of hesitation. Harold sneered. He knew any hesitation would be seen as cowardice. He raised his voice. Solon warriors, we have never retreated before any enemy. Conford blocks our path and threatens our flank. It is a must-win target. He commanded, mobilize all craftsmen to build larger, sturdier shield carts. They must withstand logs and stones, and feature retractable ladders to scale the blockade. He offered a massive incentive. Whoever reaches the wall first gets 2 ranks higher, a village of 500 households, and 200 silver coins. Whoever crosses the moat or fills the trench gets 3 ranks higher, 2 villages, 500 silver coins, and 10 horses. Whoever scales the wall and holds the breach, Harold roared, regardless of origin, will be promoted 4 ranks to battle commander, receive 5 large villages, and 1,000 silver coins. He knew rewards alone weren't enough. His voice turned cold. Military law is absolute. Any who retreat or hesitate will be executed, and their families enslaved forever. Is that clear? Understood, Great Chief, the commanders replied. I watched Harold take one last look at the dark fortress and return to his tent. Brute force wasn't enough. He needed cunning and patience. He had to reevaluate his opponent, me. Inside Conford, Brendan and I visited a makeshift infirmary. The air was thick with herbs, blood, and groans. We had held the line, but at a cost. Status? I asked the medic. The Solonians used light arrows for range. Penetration is low, the medic replied. 2 seriously wounded, 1 dead from a stray arrow to the eye. A dozen light injuries. I comforted the wounded. Rest well, Conford needs you. I saw the soldiers heartened by my presence. Outside, the cold air bit at us. Brendan reported. We used 800 paper cartridges today. I've ordered the women to work through the night to replenish our stock. Approved. Ensure they are paid and fed well. I ordered. Brendan continued. We estimate 500 slaves killed and as many wounded. They won't survive. Slave losses won't break Harold, Brendan noted. The Solon warriors suffered minimal casualties. I replied coldly. No matter. Harold's patience is finite. When he sends his elites, that is when we will strike at his core. I pointed to the hillside positions, noting that daytime exchanges proved Solonian archers were a major threat. I ordered immediate reinforcement of the hillside defenses under the cover of night. I instructed that breastworks of sandbags and stone be built at key firing positions, topped with suspended nets and thatch canopies. I explained the design. The suspended nets are thick hemp ropes draped a meter above the breastwork, covered in mud-soaked quilts or mats. Solonian light arrows will be caught and slowed by these nets, losing their lethal force even if they penetrate. The thatch canopies are slanted wooden frames covered in straw to intercept projectiles, providing our musketeers with safer cover for reloading and aiming. Brendan grasped the tactical advantage immediately, praising my wisdom and rushing off to organize the work, prioritizing the main firing positions. Brendan and I continued our patrol through the inner city. The influx of refugees and wounded had left the inner city severely overcrowded and chaotic. Despite Steward Edgar's strict hygiene regulations, the pressure of survival made enforcement nearly impossible. The ground was a muddy mess of melted snow and sewage, and the air reeked of smoke, herbs, sweat, and decay. My attention was drawn to a high platform under construction. The platform, built of logs and stone, stood higher than the outer wall's battlements. It featured a wide top for maneuvering and thick sandbag walls at the rear to absorb the recoil of the 6-pounder cannon. Wally the carpenter and his apprentices were installing a complex pulley system to hoist the heavy cannon to this vantage point. Is this for the 6-pounder? I asked, inspecting the site. Yes, Brendan confirmed. Wally says it will be ready by noon tomorrow. It offers a perfect field of fire over the corridor and enemy assembly areas. I sighed, hoping the cannon would prove its worth. With ammunition scarce, the value of this new position had to be realized at the critical moment. Brendan noted that the cannon would force Solonian archers to retreat, breaking their concentration. This will reduce the pressure on our corridor defenses, allowing our musketeers and archers to strike more effectively, Brendan added. I agreed, noting that the cannon's presence alone would demoralize the Solonians. I envisioned the cannon tearing through enemy ranks when they next attacked. Go oversee the breastworks, Brendan. Time is short, I ordered. As Brendan left, I stood alone in the cold wind. I watched the enemy camp, knowing a greater storm was brewing. In France City, Charlotte sat by her fireplace, unable to find comfort. She curled up on a sofa under a thick wool blanket. She tried to read a popular romance novel to distract herself from the reality of the war. The words blurred. She could not focus. Her thoughts were fixed on Conford, the isolated castle under siege in the northern frontier. She had barely left her home due to the harsh winter and her secret. Her abdomen was beginning to show, making her movements heavy and uncomfortable. Following Aunt Martha's advice, she stayed indoors to avoid gossip. This isolation, combined with her fear for me, weighed heavily on her. She was pale and exhausted, her blue eyes filled with tears and fatigue. Martha entered the room, bringing a chill from the outside. She looked weary and worried as she removed her cloak. Charlotte sat up urgently. Aunt Martha, is there news from Conford? Martha shook her head sadly. No confirmed news. Rumors say they are holding. Others say the Solonians are breaching the outer walls. The roads to the north are cut off. Charlotte's heart sank at the mention of a breach. She felt as if she couldn't breathe. She leaned back, tears streaming down her face. He must be alive, right? She sobbed. He promised he would return. Martha held her cold hands, comforting her. He is a capable man. Have faith, and take care of yourself. You've grown so thin. Martha's gaze fell on Charlotte's abdomen, her worry deepening. She decided it was time to speak. Miss, Martha said softly, we cannot delay this any longer. Charlotte looked at her, confused. Martha pointed to her stomach. Your condition is becoming obvious. Count Rochefort will find out eventually. It is better to tell him yourself than to let him hear rumors. Charlotte stiffened, terrified at the thought of her father's reaction, the shock, anger, and potential scandal. How would he treat her and the child, especially with the father's fate unknown? No, Charlotte trembled. Not now. Father is already overwhelmed with the city's defense. I can't add to his burden. She was paralyzed by conflict and fear. She knew concealment was impossible, but the fear of her father's wrath kept her silent. Martha understood but insisted on the gravity of the situation. This secret is like a seed. It will sprout, and the outcome will be harder to manage if it happens on its own. The Count loves you. He may be angry, but he is your father. He will eventually understand and help you find a way, she added. And if Lord Carl returns, he will need a proper status to welcome his child. Do you want the child to live in hiding? Martha's words struck Charlotte like a hammer. She knew the truth, but she was not yet ready to face the storm. Charlotte felt crushed by her father's fury, social stigma, and terror for my safety. She wept into Aunt Martha's shoulder, releasing days of pent-up fear, grievance, and longing. Martha held her silently, offering comfort and strength. As dusk fell, the room was lit only by the flickering hearth. Despite the thorny future, life had to continue. Charlotte realized she could no longer hide. For her child and herself, she had to face her father and the unknown. 3 days later, biting winds whipped the banners atop French City's walls. Count Rochefort paced the battlements, his heavy cloak unable to mask the crushing weight of the northern territory and his own helplessness. He repeatedly scanned the dense Solon army camps surrounding the city. The Sparrow Legion's Black Eagle flags flew defiantly. The siege showed no signs of relenting. The stalemate left the Count conflicted. If the main force remained, it meant the assault on Conford likely continued, and the city still held. Had Conford fallen, the Solon army would have marched north to join Harold. I was still fighting with my men. The Count felt a complex mix of relief and admiration for me. Yet, this good news brought a suffocating reality. Because the enemy remained, he was pinned in France City, unable to send aid to the besieged north. Knowing his comrades were dying while he, the governor, sat idle, tortured him. He gripped the stone wall, desperate for a way to break the deadlock and save me. Every strategy he conceived was crushed by reality. A field battle would be suicide against the Solon cavalry. Sending small infiltration teams was equally futile against such a massive force. He deeply admired me. He respected my reckless courage, wisdom, and resilience. I was the kingdom's future, and Charlotte's love for me gripped the Count's heart. He imagined his daughter's future if I died. Her bright blue eyes would be forever shadowed by grief. He could not bear for his only daughter to live in such pain. Yet, as governor, he was responsible for the lives of thousands in France City. He could not risk them on a desperate gamble. Reckless action would destroy his family's honor and betray those who trusted him. The conflict between duty and the desire to save his comrade tore him apart. The Count sighed, his breath lost to the cold wind. A steady, heavy footfall approached from the stairs. Turning, he saw Charlotte approaching. She wore a heavy cloak, dusty from travel. Despite her pale face, her blue eyes burned with a newfound, resolute fire. "Charlotte?" the Count demanded. "It's dangerous here. Go home." Charlotte did not obey. She stood beside him, staring at the Solon camps. She stood in silence, wind whipping her cloak. She waited, gathering her courage. Finally, she met her father's gaze. Her voice was steady and heavy with meaning. "Father, I must speak with you." Sensing the gravity of her tone, the Count realized this was no trivial matter. He led her back to the governor's mansion. Their footsteps echoed through the halls to his office. The hearth fire could not dispel the heavy tension between them. The Count sat at his desk, methodically packing his pipe. He used the familiar ritual to calm his nerves. He lit the pipe, the flame illuminating his weary face. "Speak, Charlotte," he said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. He watched her through the haze, feigning calm. Charlotte remained standing, hands clasped. She lowered her eyes, bracing herself. The room was silent save for the crackling fire and his pipe. She looked up, her voice clear and striking like a hammer. "Father, I am pregnant." Clatter, the Count froze, his mind going blank. He stopped breathing, his hands suspended in midair. He stared at her in utter disbelief. His pipe fell, spilling embers onto his hand. The sharp pain finally snapped him back to reality. The office fell into a deathly silence, time seemingly frozen. After a long dozen seconds, the Count gasped as if surfacing from drowning. His expression shifted from shock to confusion, then to a flicker of hidden indignation. He stared at his daughter, searching for a sign of a joke, but found only pallor and resolve. His voice trembled with disbelief. "What did you say? Pregnant? With whom?" As he saw her complex, stubborn gaze and her instinctive hand over her abdomen, a name flashed through his mind. Charlotte did not need to answer. The truth was obvious. Only one man could make his precious daughter hide such a secret, the young man currently trapped and facing death. The Count sighed, his voice heavy with realization. "It's Karl von Schmidt, isn't it?" Charlotte's lashes fluttered. Her silence was all the confirmation needed. The Count leaned back, sighing heavily as he rubbed his face in exhaustion. He did not erupt in the rage Charlotte had anticipated. Instead, shock gave way to a mix of understanding, helplessness, and heartache. He understood. Charlotte was at the age to yearn for heroes and true love. Karl von Schmidt, the brilliant young lord of Conford performing miracles in the northern frontier, fit that ideal perfectly. In such perilous circumstances, such feelings were understandable. He was simply stunned by his daughter's reckless courage in declaring her love. To choose to bear a child while her lover was trapped and facing death was an extreme commitment. He realized now that her escort mission to Conford had been a cover for this deeper intent. "When did this happen?" the Count asked, his voice calmer. "During my last trip to Conford," Charlotte whispered, blushing but meeting his eyes. The Count nodded. "The timing aligned with my rise to fame." He sat up straight, his tone grave. "Charlotte, I don't blame you, but you must realize how dangerous this situation is." He looked at her abdomen. "Karl is surrounded by 100,000 Solonians, his life hanging by a thread. To do this now," he commanded with concern, "stay home. France City is unstable, and rumors are lethal. Take care of yourself and the child. We wait for Karl's return." He knew he had to force her to face the brutal reality. His voice dropped, cruel but necessary. "You must prepare for the worst. War is merciless. No one can guarantee Karl will return. If he doesn't..." Seeing her turn deathly pale, he hardened his heart. This was the weight she had chosen to carry. "Since you chose this path, you must have the courage to bear the consequences, good or bad. If Karl falls, this child is his only legacy, the heir to Conford, and the only witness to your love." He spoke with solemn weight. "You must be strong for yourself and the child. Protect him, and ensure he is born healthy. This is a responsibility for the House of Rochefort and a promise you must keep to Karl, regardless of his fate. Do you understand?" Tears filled Charlotte's eyes, but she nodded firmly. "I understand, father. Thank you." As she left, the Count sat in a whirlwind of complex emotions. Anger? There was little left. Instead, he felt heartache for his daughter, worry for the situation, and a strange, indescribable sensation. He was going to be a grandfather. This news rippled through his life, previously defined only by war and politics. A new life was growing, while its father fought for his life in the north. A sense of unprecedented urgency surged within him. He could no longer wait passively while Conford was crushed. He had to act, for his daughter, the unborn child, and the young man he admired. "Karl von Schmidt," the Count muttered, his eyes sharpening. "You must hold on. You can't leave your child fatherless." After 3 days of silence, the Solon camp sounded the horns of war again. They had learned from their initial defeat and made tactical adjustments. The new shield carts appearing at the corridor entrance were reinforced and significantly modified. These carts were larger and more complex in structure. The most notable change was a long, thick wooden canopy extending from the top, designed to shield the soldiers. While not bulletproof, its primary purpose was concealment. The canopy cast deep shadows, obscuring the view of the defenders on the walls and preventing precise targeting of the soldiers below. This forced the defenders into inefficient area fire, increasing ammunition waste and reducing Solonian casualties. The added protection significantly increased the weight of the carts. To compensate, 8 slaves were assigned to push each cart using long, multi-handled wooden bars. Ingeniously, The canopy was connected to the main cart via large wooden pins. The Solonians had clearly accounted for the boulder blocking the corridor. Their plan: once the cart reached the boulder, the slaves would pull the pins, allowing the canopy to tip forward and form a makeshift ramp over the obstacle for their elite infantry. Pushed by the slaves, the giant shield cart rolled into the narrow corridor like a heavy iron turtle. Its canopy cast a deep shadow, severely hindering the defenders' line of sight. As the cart entered range, I watched the defenders in the hillside fortifications open fire. Arrows and bullets rained down, but with far less effect than before. The canopy forced the defenders to rely on blind, area-wide suppression rather than precise sniping. While stray shots still caused casualties, the efficiency of the defense had plummeted. Lead bullets occasionally pierced the shield cart's wooden roofs, but failed to cause sustained damage. Though the slaves knew the wood offered little protection, the physical barrier provided enough psychological comfort to keep them pushing. Driven by the Solon Provost Corps' blades and their desperate need for safety, they pushed the carts forward. I watched as the defenders responded by rolling heavy stones and logs down the slope. Boom! A boulder smashed through a cart's roof, sending splinters flying. The boulder continued down the slope, crushing several slaves into pulp. The carnage did not deter the remaining slaves. Threatened by the Solon Provost Corps, the slaves stepped over their comrades' corpses to keep pushing the damaged carts. The Solon army responded aggressively. I observed Herald deploy over 2,000 archers in a massive formation behind the corridor entrance. At the commander's order, thousands of arrows arched over the slaves, raining down upon the defenders' positions on the hillsides. The defenders had not been idle. Under my and Brendan's direction, they had reinforced the hillside with stone breastworks. Crucially, we had installed suspended nets and thatch canopies, thick, mud-soaked quilts and branches, to act as a buffer. A secondary slanted thatch roof served as a first line of defense. These defenses proved effective. Most Solon arrows were caught or deflected by the thatch and nets. The few arrows that penetrated the layers lacked the force to pierce the soldiers' armor. Protected by this ceiling, the defenders' morale soared. They emerged from behind the breastworks to target the dense Solon archer formation. Muskets roared and arrows flew from the hillside. The counterattack caused chaos and casualties among the Solon archers. The defenders minimized their own losses by retreating behind the breastworks after firing. The Solon suppression tactic faltered. While the defenders were restricted to their positions, they suffered negligible casualties. Conversely, the defenders' precision fire inflicted significant psychological and physical damage on the Solon archers. During a lull in the archery duel, the slaves pushed the carts to the massive boulder blocking the corridor. The Solon officer screamed, "Quick! Set the ladder!" Slaves rushed from the cart's cover to pull the pins securing the cart's wooden roofs. Despite the hail of arrows and stones, they frantically pried at the pins. "Pull them out!" the officer roared. A pin snapped, and the slaves shoved the heavy roof toward the boulder to create a ramp. The roof groaned as it tilted, threatening to bridge the gap to the inner wall. Suddenly, a shot rang out. An arrow pierced a slave's throat, and he collapsed. More arrows followed, killing the others. The ramp crashed to the ground, failing the attempt. The Solon officer raged, ordering his men to target the defenders' embrasures. A defender who had leaned out to shoot was immediately swarmed by arrows. He was struck by multiple arrows through the gaps in the breastwork. He tumbled down the stairs, his fate unknown. The Solon overseer forced a new group of slaves to lift the ramp again. The defenders, emboldened by their success, fought with reckless abandon. "For comfort, stop them," a veteran shouted, exposing himself to hurl a heavy stone at the slaves. The stone struck the group, causing screams of agony. Archers fired blindly into the crowd below. The defenders ignored the incoming fire, using stones, muskets, and arrows to strike any slave approaching the boulder. The ramp was repeatedly raised and knocked down amidst the carnage. The ground beneath the boulder was slick with blood and corpses. The Solon assault stalled in a bloody stalemate. Finally, after brutal attrition, the slaves successfully bridged the boulder and the cart. The Solon officer immediately signaled for an infantry assault. Woo! Toot toot toot. Armored Solon elite infantry charged up the corridor, trampling the exhausted slaves in their path. They focused solely on the ramp, victory seemingly within reach. The lead soldier stepped onto the blood-slicked ramp. Suddenly, a cold, viscous liquid drenched him, smelling sharply of naphtha. I watched as the veteran realized the danger, seeing defenders above pouring more oil from a barrel. "It's naphtha. Scatter!" A fire arrow struck the oil midair. Boom! The oil ignited instantly, engulfing the ramp and the climbing Solan soldiers in a wall of fire. Agonizing screams tore through the battlefield as I watched Solan soldiers, turned into human torches, collapse from the wooden bridge. Some fell to their deaths, while others collided with comrades, spreading the inferno. I watched the fire consume the bridge, transforming it into a barrier of death that halted the Solan infantry's charge. Trapped in the narrow corridor, I saw the Solan assault dissolve into chaos amidst smoke and flames. Seeing the failure, I observed the Solan commander, who, despite his frustration, realized the attack was lost. I heard the Solan camp sound the retreat with urgent, rhythmic gongs. Relieved, I watched the surviving Solan soldiers retreat in disarray, leaving behind a hellish scene. I noted that no one attempted to rescue the burning men or salvage the charred bridge. My men in the Carnford garrison watched in silence, neither cheering nor wasting arrows on the dying. We focused on resting, bandaging wounds, and replenishing supplies. We knew this was merely a temporary reprieve. The Solonians would return. I watched the fire eventually die out, leaving only charred remains. The corridor remained a blackened, foul-smelling death zone to me, dominated by the immovable boulder. I watched Harold stand on the hillside, his cold gaze fixed on the blood-soaked, scorched corridor. The sight of twisted corpses and the mocking boulder created an oppressive atmosphere that I could feel weighing on us. The stench of burnt flesh lingered, and I saw his generals dare not breathe as he stood in icy silence. Finally, I heard Harold command, "Order the craftsman camp to build reinforced, iron-plated shield carts overnight. I want them ready by dawn." The assault continues. I observed Sven feeling a chill. He knew this calm masked his brother's true fury. I knew Harold, usually a conqueror of Plantagenet elites, was humiliated by this minor frontier fortress. This was a direct challenge to his authority and dignity that I recognized clearly. I saw Sven consider advising a siege, but one look at Harold's eyes silenced him. I knew the army's honor and Harold's reputation were now inseparable from the fall of Carnford. The Solan camp worked through the night, and I heard the sounds of construction echoing incessantly. I watched Harold supervise every detail until the next morning, when the sun pierced the clouds. I saw a new, monstrously reinforced shield cart pushed to the front. It resembled a massive, ironclad siege tower base to my eyes. I counted 8 pairs of wheels supporting its immense weight. The top was covered in thick iron plating, which I knew would be impervious to fire arrows and naphtha. I noted the structure featured a fixed, impenetrable ceiling. Its primary innovation, as I observed, was a front shield that could be lowered to form a sturdy assault ramp once it reached the boulder. I saw 16 slaves required to push the behemoth via a central beam and side handles. I watched Harold signal the start. As horns blared, I saw the slaves, driven by execution squads, push the steel beast into the narrow corridor. I heard the heavy wheels grind over the charred remains of yesterday's dead. I watched through my brass telescope from the wall. Seeing the cart crush the debris and advance, I felt a mix of unease and grudging admiration. "The Solonians are beyond my expectations," I told Brendan. "Their adaptability is terrifying. This isn't the work of nomadic raiders. Their engineering rivals the kingdom's best," I remarked. The reinforced cart proved a formidable challenge for my defenders. I saw musket balls and arrows merely glance off the iron plating. I watched rolling stones and logs bounce off the sloped roof, causing minimal damage to the cart or its operators. Meanwhile, I saw Solan archers keep my defenders pinned down with constant suppression fire. Despite protective screens, my men were forced to stay low, rendering their ranged defense ineffective. Shielded by archers and their own armor, I watched the steel beast reach the boulder. The cart successfully pressed against the base of the boulder in my view. I saw slaves wedge the wheels to secure the platform. The cart now served as a stable, protected bridgehead, I realized. Inside, I saw a slave's hammer at the pins holding the front shield. With a crash, I watched the ironclad shield fall forward, its edge resting perfectly on the boulder. The inside of the shield featured pre-installed rungs, creating a ready-made ladder that I could clearly see. The natural barrier that had protected Carnford was now a bridge for the enemy, I noted with dread. A roar of triumph erupted from the Solon lines. I saw my defenders turn pale. I heard a veteran officer scream, "Naphtha! Burn that bridge!" I watched soldiers pour boiling, viscous oil onto the wooden rungs and the soldiers below. I saw an archer ignite an oil-soaked arrow and aim at the fuel-drenched area. The arrow flew, and I watched flames erupt instantly. At that critical moment, I saw a dark, shadowy orb shoot silently from the Solon rear at impossible speed. A cold, soul-devouring aura swept over the naphtha, extinguishing the impending fire. The flames and fuel vapors vanished instantly, as if swallowed by an invisible maw. A flaming arrow in mid-flight lost its fire, turning into a charred, useless stick that plummeted to the ground. The corridor was left damp, silent, and devoid of flame. The Solon archer who had fired the arrow stared in disbelief. He looked toward the source of the black light. Amidst the Solon ranks, a thin figure in a gray hooded robe lowered a withered hand. From beneath the hood, a cold, mocking gaze seemed to pierce the battlefield. The Solonians had deployed a Soran warlock. The warlock nodded at the archer with elegant, mocking condescension, as if dismissing his struggle as futile. The defenders on the wall froze in shock. "Watch for arrows," someone shouted, but it was too late. The Solon archers unleashed a volley like a swarm of venomous bees. Asterisk thwip. Thwip. Asterisk several arrows pierced the archer's leather armor, burying themselves in his chest and abdomen. He dropped his bow, his shock replaced by agony and fading life. He tried to shout a warning, but only blood poured out. He collapsed into the corridor, his final vision filled with the unlit naphtha and the warlock's mocking shadow. Suppressing fire. "Musketeers, move up!" the officer roared, snapping the others out of their stupor. But the moment for defense had passed. Exploiting the chaos, Solon elite infantry charged up the stone stairs, trampling the unlit oil. Tension spiked on the wall due to the warlock's intervention. Lena rushed to me, face flushed with anger. "Lord, the Solonians have a Soran warlock. They ruined our fire attack. Let us fight. We cannot let them use magic unchecked." Morian nodded, gripping his staff with battle-ready intensity. I stared at the surging Solon infantry, silent. Lena turned to Conrad. "Teacher, we are ready. Please let us fight. Don't let them think Carnford has no mages." Conrad weighed his student's youthful zeal against the dangerous warlock. He suggested to me, "Lena and Morian have talent. Perhaps they could provide defensive support, fire or ice. It's better than letting the enemy warlock act freely." I looked at the young mages, then shook my head at Conrad. "Conrad, Lena, Morian, thank you," I said firmly. "But this is not a magic academy or a training ground. This is a battlefield." I pointed to the bloody, arrow-strewn zone. "Here, survival isn't decided by magic, but by stray bullets or a hidden blade. Your shields can block fireballs, but can they stop every surprise attack from every angle?" I looked at the pale Lena. "You have bright futures. I will not risk your lives against battle-hardened Soran warlocks." Lena tried to argue, but Conrad placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling her to stop. He knew I was right. As a mentor, Conrad knew his students lacked the cold, survival instincts forged only in blood. Conrad had only agreed because of his deep trust in his brother, me. I cherished this bond. But I saw the bigger picture. These apprentices were rare talents. They were Conrad's legacy. Their value far exceeded their immediate combat utility. Sending them into the meat grinder of Carnford against veteran warlocks was reckless. If either were harmed, I could never face Conrad again. The battlefield was a place of raw, unprincipled violence, unlike the regulated duels of the academy. "Your place is not here," I said, eyes fixed on the gray-robed warlock. "Protecting yourselves is your greatest contribution. As for that warlock, I have a way to handle him." I turned to Brendan. "Order the artillery. Target the enemy archers. Disrupt their formation." Brendan immediately signaled the high ground battery with red and yellow flags. The 6-pounder cannon, installed overnight by Old Wally, was aimed directly at the dense cluster of Solon archers. The gun crew stood ready, eyes locked on the signals. Seeing the order, the gun captain roared, "Target the enemy archers. Load." The crew loaded the powder charge and a heavy iron cannonball. A crewman rammed the charge home, then pierced the fuse. The captain adjusted the aim, calculating the trajectory. He checked the target one last time and shouted, "Fire!" The igniter touched the fuse. Sizzle! A deafening blast erupted. Boom! The cannon recoiled against the buffers, spewing fire and thick white smoke. The crew covered their ears against the shockwave. A heavy iron ball screamed through the air, hurtling toward the Solon lines at lethal speed. The Solon archers, still reveling in their success, remained oblivious to the death approaching them. A Solon archer looked up to see a black speck rapidly expanding in the sky. He froze, momentarily unable to process the sight. Seconds later, the terrifying scream of the projectile hit him. Cannon, he realized, paralyzed by sudden, overwhelming dread. Before he could scream or flee, a thunderous boom echoed. The cannonball struck directly between the archer and his comrades. Like a stone hitting water, the impact instantly reduced the men to a mist of blood and severed limbs. The ball gouged a crater, spraying mud and gore over nearby soldiers. Its momentum barely checked. It continued to bounce forward with terrifying speed. Like a reaper's scythe, it plowed through the dense ranks. Any archer in its path was crushed, limbs shattered, and organs ruptured, leaving a trail of carnage. On its third bounce, the projectile slammed into a squad of heavy-armored Solon infantry waiting in the rear. Their thick plate armor crumpled like paper, and the soldiers within were crushed to death instantly. Finally, having spent its kinetic energy, the ball smashed into an arrow supply tent, injuring more soldiers before coming to a halt amidst the wreckage. A single shot caused over 20 casualties and shattered the Solon formation, spreading panic like a plague. Artillery. It's their cannons. Scatter. Take cover. Solon officers struggled to maintain order, but discipline crumbled before the terror of an invisible, unstoppable weapon. From the walls, I watched the chaos through a telescope. Artillery. Keep firing to prevent them from regrouping. Musketeers. Free fire. Target any soldiers attempting to rush the corridor. At the rear watchtower, Harold felt a moment of relief as his shield carts successfully bridged the obstacle. A faint, fleeting look of ease crossed his strained face. His army had bled for 10 days to clear this single, seemingly minor passage. The casualties and delays had been a severe test of his authority. With the path open, the true siege was finally beginning. He prepared to order his elite infantry to launch the final assault. Just as he raised his arm, he spotted a tiny black appearing over Conford, rapidly growing in his vision. It was no arrow or stone. Its speed and trajectory signaled destruction. Cannonball, Harold realized instantly. His bodyguards lunged to shield him, attempting to pull him from the tower's edge. Back off. Harold shoved them aside. A veteran of many battles, he saw the trajectory was aimed far from his position, targeting the dense archer ranks instead. He stood firm, eyes locked on the deadly iron ball. He wanted to witness the power of the weapon that had devastated the Sparrow Legion. He watched, his pupils contracting. The ball slammed into the center of the archer formation. There were no screams, only a dull, horrific thud and a burst of blood. Several archers vanished, replaced by mangled flesh and a cratered earth. The ball bounced again, rolling through the ranks with relentless momentum, carving a path of broken bones and dying whales. As he assessed the damage, another dull, familiar roar erupted from the city walls. Boom! A second shot followed, slamming into another part of the panicked, regrouping archer formation. The same scene repeated, precise impact followed by lethal, bouncing carnage. More archers were pulverized, while those nearby were incapacitated by the shockwave, bleeding from their noses and ears. 2 shots caused dozens of casualties and threw the Solon-ranged forces into a state of contagious panic. Harold watched as survivors ignored their officers, fleeing the kill zone. Order the archers to retreat and regroup. Shield cart infantry, charge. Take the wall breach at all costs. Harold commanded coldly. He could not let his ranged forces be wasted. He realized he had to use the artillery's reload time to push infantry into close-quarters combat. The sharp sound of retreat rang out across the Solon lines. Terrified, the archers broke formation and fled, desperate to escape the next strike. As if to mock their fear, the 6-pounder cannon roared again. Boom! A third ball whistled in, striking a group of slow-moving archers. More soldiers were reduced to limbs and gore, the shockwave knocking others to the ground. Harold's face darkened. He had known about the cannon from Ulf's intelligence, but wondered why it hadn't been used earlier. Now he understood. I had held this trump card to strike when his main force was concentrated, maximizing both physical and psychological damage. The strike had crippled his ranged support and shattered morale. Order the infantry. Drive the slaves forward. Charge now. Use the reload window to take the passage. Harold commanded. He had to seize this narrow window of opportunity. Elite Solon infantry drove waves of slaves toward the passage, flooding the stairs like a broken dam. Battle cries filled the air once more. However, the charge was met with a brutal counterattack. Without archer suppression, I watched the Conford garrison emerge from their breastworks, unleashing a storm of musket fire and arrows. The defenders poured all their pent-up rage into the crowded corridor. Musketeers aimed calmly, picking off any target that dared emerge from behind the shield carts. Whether heavily armored Solon warriors or terrified slaves, anyone exposed was cut down by crossfire. Archers rained down arrows, deepening the chaos. The narrow corridor became a literal death trap. Solon infantry and slaves fell in heaps, their bodies clogging the path and halting the advance. Blood soaked the earth, accompanied by endless screams and groans. Under the defenders' precise, heavy fire, the Solon attack stalled in the corridor. Survivors huddled beneath shield carts, their charge turning into a desperate, trapped defense. From his watchtower, I watched Harold observe the carnage through his telescope. I watched as Harold saw his soldiers fall like wheat before a scythe, their charge shattered against the fortress's defenses. I observed as Harold realized that without suppressing the enemy's artillery and flanking fire, further charges were futile. After a long silence, I watched Harold breathe in the smoke-filled air and rasp, "Order a halt." The entire army, retreat. The horn of retreat sounded, echoing with humiliation across the battlefield. The Solon infantry and slaves fled in disarray, abandoning their dead and the corridor they had spent 10 days fighting to secure. As the Solonians retreated, I watched the gears of the Conford gate groan into motion. The massive oak drawbridge crashed down over the moat. My auxiliary soldiers, faces numb and hardened by war, filed out in silence. Armed with short blades and hooked ropes, they moved with grim efficiency. They fanned out into the blood-soaked corridor to clear the battlefield. They treated the corpses of Solon soldiers and slaves with the cold detachment of butchers. With practiced strokes, they severed heads, secured them with ropes, and tossed them into baskets. To the auxiliaries, the heads of combat soldiers and slaves were equally valuable proof of merit. They recovered my Plantagenet wounded and retrieved the identification tags of their own fallen. Any surviving Solonians were summarily executed. Prisoners were not needed. Another group of my auxiliaries rushed toward the abandoned shield carts with explosive satchels. They expertly wedged the explosives into the cart's joints and axles, setting fuses with precision. I watched the Solon army observe this process from afar. They looked on in horror as my auxiliaries stripped their comrades' armor and decapitated the bodies. Fury and humiliation rippled through the Solon ranks. An auxiliary of mine, noticing the hateful glares, stood up, wiped blood from his face, and provocatively held up a severed head. He made a mocking throat-slitting gesture, grinning cruelly. "Bastards! Kill them!" The provocation ignited the Solonians. Dozens of young soldiers charged forward to avenge their comrades. Bang! 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 My musketeers on the mountainside opened fire. The lead soldiers fell instantly. Solon officers screamed, forcibly restraining the rest of their men. They stood by, teeth gritted and fists clenched in impotent rage. The cleanup concluded. The baskets of heads were hauled inside, and my auxiliaries lit the fuses before sprinting back to the gate. As the last soldier vanished, the drawbridge rose and sealed shut. The moment it closed, a series of deafening explosions rocked the corridor. Fireballs erupted as the shield carts were obliterated, scattering wood, metal, and mangled remains into the air. The corridor was once again blocked by debris and corpses. My defenders cheered, "Long live Confort! Long live Lord Carl!" The shouts echoed through the mountains. I stood on the wall, surrounded by my cheering men. The roar of the crowd was like a tidal wave, filled with the fervor of survivors and fanatical devotion to me. Despite the high morale, I remained calm. I didn't cheer. I simply stared across the wreckage toward the silent Solon camp. A faint, cold smile played on my lips, a silent declaration of war. I knew someone in those tents was watching me through a telescope. In the Solon command tower, I watched Harold lower his brass telescope. He stood motionless. The image of me still burned into his mind. Despite the distance, I knew he felt the weight of my cold, confident, and mocking gaze. 10 days of blood and thousands of casualties had resulted only in a humiliating defeat and mockery for him. Yet, beneath his anger, a fierce desire for conquest surged, a beast awakened by failure. I was no longer just an obstacle. I was a target Harold had to personally crush. This challenge excited him more than any previous conquest. He turned to his generals, his expression hardening into absolute authority, and fixed his gaze on his brother, Sven. "The frontal assault on the corridor ends here," Harold declared. "Further attempts are merely throwing lives away against their artillery." Sven looked relieved but frustrated. Before Sven could suggest a siege, Harold ordered, "Tell the craftsmen to stop the frontal assault. I want arrow towers built beyond the range of their cannons. They must be taller than the mountain itself, allowing our archers to overlook their walls and suppress them." Sven realized the tactical brilliance. Height would neutralize the mountain defenses and expose the fortress's vulnerabilities. "A brilliant plan, brother," Sven noted. "But building towers that tall will take at least 10 days. Is that too long?" He hinted at the risks of such a long delay and questioned if a more direct approach or retreat was warranted. Harold, ignoring the hesitation, ordered the corridor sealed. "If we cannot ascend, they shall not descend. Let them watch us build arrow towers until we crush their castle." Having issued his orders, Harold turned and strode away from the watchtower without a glance at Sven. Sven watched his brother depart, his intended words dissolving into a sigh of resignation. He knew Harold. After such a setback, he would never abandon his objective. A 10-day siege tower construction meant a long, brutal war of attrition. Suppressing his anxiety, Sven turned to relay the orders. At the royal palace in Play City, Friedrich knelt on the cold marble, helmet tucked under his arm, his face etched with urgency. Having just retreated to Old Osric Castle, he looked haggard from the fighting, yet his eyes burned with intensity. "Your Majesty, I implore you to send reinforcements to Confort," he echoed through the hall. "My brother Karl holds the city against 100,000 Solonians alone. He is in grave danger. If Confort falls, the northern frontier is exposed. I will lead a small detachment of elite cavalry to break the siege and save Karl." King Heinrich XI frowned. He did not want to lose me, a legendary young lord of the northern frontier. Confort's strategic value in pinning down Solon forces was immense. Yet, looking at his hesitant, whispering ministers, he felt trapped. The royal capital had just survived a siege. His remaining troops were the core defense of the kingdom's center. Losing the capital would be a catastrophe. After a long silence, Heinrich spoke wearily. "Friedrich, I admire your loyalty, but the capital is vulnerable. I cannot spare these troops." He signed an imperial decree and handed it to an attendant. "Order Count Eisenberg, governor of Eglinist, to immediately dispatch elite reinforcements to Confort." Friedrich's heart sank. Relying on the cowardly, treacherous Count Eisenberg was like asking a tiger for its skin. "Your Majesty, the Count will never risk his forces to save a man he envies," Friedrich protested. "Enough." Heinrich waved him off. "Eisenberg has the men and the fortress. It is his duty. The matter is settled." Friedrich bowed. "As you command," though his heart turned cold. As expected, the decree sent to Eglinist was ignored. Count Eisenberg dismissed the order, claiming his own forces were needed to guard against Solonian remnants. Friedrich, desperate, petitioned the king repeatedly, and even knelt outside the palace. Heinrich, finally angered by Eisenberg's blatant defiance, felt his royal authority challenged. Even Queen Katerina, usually detached from politics, was moved by Friedrich's plight and her husband's frustration. She traveled to Eglinist herself to confront her father. The details of their meeting remained private, but news soon followed. Count Eisenberg announced he would send 10,000 men under his trusted commander, Sir Valerius, to aid Confort. Friedrich was overjoyed. While insufficient against 100,000, it was a start. He immediately departed for Eglinist to join the relief force. At the governor's mansion in Eglinist, Count Eisenberg sat lazily on a bearskin chair, polishing his ornate sword. Seeing Friedrich arrive, he offered a mocking smile. "Ah, the heroic Friedrich. Why leave the king's favor to visit my humble fortress?" Eisenberg sneered. Friedrich suppressed his rage and bowed. "Count, I am here to join Sir Valerius. When do we depart?" "Depart? Don't be rash." Eisenberg sipped his wine. "Moving 10,000 men requires logistics and preparation. Valerius is preparing. Soldiers need to be fed, unlike those who brag about minor defensive feats to the king." Friedrich bit his tongue. "Confort is dying. Every moment counts. I am being cautious. If we walk into a trap, who is responsible? You? Go wait for Valerius." Friedrich left, seething. The preparations took 3 days, with Valerius inventing endless excuses. On the 4th day, a force of barely 8,000 second-rate troops finally crawled out of Eglinist. Their pace was agonizing. They marched less than 20 miles a day, camping early as if on a holiday. Friedrich repeatedly urged Valerius to hurry. Valerius, a portly, red-faced man, replied, "Patience, knight. A long march tires the men. We must be steady." Valerius used bureaucratic jargon to mask his deliberate sluggishness. Friedrich realized this was Eisenberg's plot: fulfill the king's order in name, but ensure the relief force arrived too late. Eisenberg wanted me dead to eliminate a rival without risking his own men. He would simply claim the city fell before they could arrive. Despair burned in Friedrich's chest. He knew this relief force was useless. He made one last plea. "Sir, let me take a small cavalry detachment ahead. I must reach Confort." Valerius smirked. "Too dangerous, knight. I cannot risk you. Stay with the main force." His last hope shattered. Friedrich sat on his horse, staring north toward Confort, his knuckles white with rage. I felt an unprecedented sense of helplessness and sorrow. Despite my martial prowess, I was shackled by bureaucratic intrigue, forced to watch my brother struggle in despair. I looked up, letting the cold wind lash my dusty face, and silently vowed, "Karl, my dear brother, hold on. I am coming to save you." Days passed, and the Solon camp transformed into a bustling construction site. The air, once thick with smoke and blood, now carried the scent of fresh timber, the clanging of hammers, and the roar of labor. Near Confort Mountain, 2 massive wooden structures began to rise. Towering over the tents, they were being reinforced layer by slaves and craftsmen. These were the giant arrow towers ordered by Harold, featuring wide bases for stability and internal spiral ladders. Once completed, their platforms would overlook the summit of Confort, providing Solon archers with an unmatched vantage point. The project was driven by Solon overseers and a group of captured Plantagenet craftsmen. These carpenters, blacksmiths, and stonemasons, once loyal to local lords, now worked under the threat of the sword and the promise of reward. Harold recognized their value, offering them better conditions than common slaves. He guaranteed their safety and provided pay and rations far exceeding what they received under Plantagenet lords. For these artisans struggling to survive, the offer was irresistible. Driven by survival and better treatment, they worked with startling efficiency. They directed the slaves, ensuring every joint and support was precise and sturdy. National loyalty paled in comparison to the brutal reality of survival. Though the defenders on the walls were their countrymen, their own lives and livelihoods now rested with the Solonians. They might feel guilt in the dead of night, but their hands never faltered by day. To them, living, and living well, was all that mattered. I stood behind the inner wall, my telescope locked on the rising arrow towers. Harold's intent was clear: Build towers higher than the mountain to negate the defender's geographical advantage. Once finished, Solon archers could rain heavy arrows down, rendering the breastworks, screens, and canopies on the mountain slopes useless. I could not afford a shooting match. The garrison was too small to trade casualties with the Solonians. If the towers were completed, the defenders would be forced to abandon their positions, allowing the Solonians to charge the inner wall. We cannot let them finish, I told Brendan. We must strike and destroy them before they are completed. Brendan looked at the heavily fortified corridor blocked by trenches and Czech hedgehogs. I understand, but the Solonians have sealed the corridor. A frontal assault is suicide. The corridor, once our greatest defensive asset, had become a trap. The tactical situation had reversed. The same path that once protected us now blocked any hope of a sortie. I turned toward the steep cliffs behind the castle, my eyes sharp. Who said we have to use the corridor? The back of the mountain is a sheer cliff, Brendan stammered. How can we descend? Remember the flint mine? I prompted. Hans and Wally built a mining platform and a pulley lifting system on the southwest cliff. Brendan's eyes lit up. You mean to use the pulley to lower our soldiers down the cliff at night? Exactly. The Solonians expect us to attack from the front. Select 10 elite soldiers skilled in night raids, equipped with naphtha and explosives. Lower them down the cliff to bypass the front lines and infiltrate the camp. Target the towers and burn them to the ground. After the strike, don't return the same way. Create chaos and push toward the corridor. We will signal from the walls, then sally out to meet you and crush the blockade. Brendan grew excited as he processed the plan. It is risky, but the Solonians will never see it coming. I will select the men and prepare the supplies immediately. Hurry, I urged. Time is against us. Keep it swift, silent, and ruthless. Strike and retreat. Understood. Brendan saluted and marched off, his eyes burning with resolve. At 1 a.m., the northern frontier was shrouded in thick clouds and dim starlight. Yet, at the foot of Conford Mountain, the Solon camp was ablaze with light and noise. Thousands of slaves worked like ants under the lash of whips and blades. Giant braziers illuminated the sight, revealing the distorted, fearful faces of the laborers. New timber was hauled up using crude pulleys as the towers grew toward the sky. The scaffolds rose higher, the towers resembling skeletal giants in the night. Slaves who faltered were cut down instantly, their heads displayed on poles as warnings. The air reeked of sweat, blood, and wood. The garrison had attempted a shot with our 6-pounder cannon earlier, but the shell fell far short, failing to damage the construction. The walls had since fallen silent, seemingly conceding the futility of the bombardment. This emboldened the Solonians, who mocked the Plantagenet savages, convinced victory was imminent. To prevent a breakout, the Solonians had fortified the corridor with trenches and barriers. They had sealed the mountain exit with a dense defensive perimeter. Sentries stood watch, scanning the darkness. They frequently threw torches toward the corridor entrance to check for movement. In stark contrast to the noisy Solon camp, the Conford defenses remained deathly silent. Only the faint silhouettes of sentries could be seen, with not a sound escaping the mountain slopes. Occasionally, a solitary, abrupt gunshot rang out from a dark firing port, the bullet vanishing into the void before Solon sentries could locate the source. These sporadic, neurotic shots served as psychological harassment rather than effective tactical strikes. The corridor, once a deadly trap for the Solonians, had become a disadvantage for the defenders. Once the attackers committed heavy forces to seal it, the defenders were trapped on the mountain, losing their ability to launch sorties or disrupt enemy operations. They could only watch helplessly as the enemy constructed siege engines, threatening their very survival. Purely passive defense is a recipe for defeat in any war. Simultaneously, on the cliff behind Conford Castle, the wind howled in near-total darkness. Far from the main battlefield, only the wind and the distant, muffled noise of the Solon camp remained. I waited for 5 figures, chosen by Brendan for a top-secret night raid, who stood as if merged with the shadows. Master Andre, a Tier 3 knight and veteran of Conford with immense combat experience, led the team. Behind him were 4 elites, Roderick, Oliver, Mark, and the officer Roland, a Tier 2 knight. To ensure stealth and agility, the 5 were lightly equipped. They wore non-reflective black leather armor and carried shortened flintlock carbines on their chests. These carbines, with barrels sawed short, had an effective range of only 15 paces but were lethal in close-quarters night combat. Each carried 2 Molotov cocktails, bottles with oil-soaked wicks, designed to create instant infernos. Roderick also carried a 40 kilograms explosive satchel for demolition. Everyone except Roderick carried arming swords for tight spaces, while Master Andre kept his polished longsword. I approached them, sensing their suppressed, burning resolve in the dark. I shook each man's hand, conveying silent trust and heavy responsibility. I stepped back and rendered a solemn military salute to the suicide squad. I told Master Andre, "The mission is important, but your safety is paramount. If it becomes impossible, retreat immediately. We will find another way." Andre nodded, his eyes firm beneath his hood. "Rest assured, Lord, we will not fail our mission and will return safely." Without further words, Andre turned toward the makeshift pulley lift at the cliff's edge. 2 engineers stood ready, checking the ropes and winch. Andre stepped onto the wooden platform, and as the engineers released the brake, he descended silently into the dark abyss. Roland, Roderick, and the others followed, vanishing into the night below. I stood at the cliff's edge, my cloak fluttering in the wind, listening to the faint friction of ropes and my own racing heart. As the last man, Mark, disappeared, I prayed. The risk was immense, but for Confer's survival, I had to gamble. Below, the silence remained absolute. At 1:30 a.m., the deepest hour of the night, 2 red signal flares shot from the Confort inner city walls. They exploded into blinding light, illuminating the grim battlements and the edge of the Solon camp in a blood-red glow. The signal acted like a spark in a grease fire. The Confort defense line erupted. "Fire!" the officer screamed, and a deafening volley of musket fire tore through the night. Dozens of firing ports erupted with long tongues of flame, shattering the darkness. A storm of lead rained down on the Solonian blockade, the relentless gunfire outshining any holiday fireworks. The 6-pounder cannon on the wall joined the chorus with a thunderous boom. A heavy iron ball whistled through the air, smashing into the Solonian sandbag fortifications. Though not a direct hit, the ricochet and flying debris crushed several Solon soldiers, sparking panicked screams. The unexpected intensity of the barrage threw the Solonian front line into chaos. Enemy attack. Night raid. Officers shouted as soldiers scrambled from their sleep, blindly firing arrows toward the flashes in the corridor. The darkness and the deafening noise left them unable to determine the enemy's true intent. The blockade descended into disorder. Soldiers watched the corridor exit, waiting for an infantry charge that never came. Even the Arrow Tower construction site was thrown into panic. Slaves and craftsmen fled, forcing overseers to brandish whips and blades, shouting, "Hold your positions. It's just a feint." While the entire Solon army was distracted by the violent feint at the front, the 5-man team lay in wait. Hundreds of paces from the Arrow Tower site, hidden in the dark forest edge, the 5 figures lurked in the shadows. Master Andre observed the chaotic, illuminated battlefield with sharp, cold eyes. He smirked. My feint had worked perfectly. "The time has come," Andre whispered. "Prepare." Roland lit his Molotov cocktail, the orange flame illuminating his determined face. Oliver, Mark, and Roderick followed suit. 5 flickering flames appeared at the forest edge like the eyes of vengeful demons. Andre checked the wind direction one last time and growled, "Charge." Like panthers, the 5 warriors lunged from the shadows, hurling their burning bottles into the chaotic crowd. The Solonian camp's perimeter was usually strictly guarded. However, the rush to build the Arrow Tower had led to cluttered supply piles and lax security in the forest-adjacent zone. With all eyes fixed on the front, no one expected a lethal strike from the safe forest flank. The bottles traced bright arcs through the air. They landed with precision among the slaves and overseers gathered near the Arrow Tower base. I watched as clay pots shattered, spraying viscous naphtha that ignited instantly upon contact with fire. Orange flames erupted, engulfing the panicked crowd. Fire! Ambush! From the forest! I heard screams of terror ring out. I observed the victims wailing as they rolled on the ground, inadvertently spreading the flames to their comrades and nearby supplies. Even those untouched were paralyzed by the sudden assault and the terrifying inferno, and I saw their formation collapse. "Charge!" Master Andre roared, diving into the chaos. I watched his sword flash like silver, slicing the throats of two sullen overseers attempting to rally resistance. I saw Roland, Roderick, and the others follow, driving into the enemy like a wedge, firing their flintlock carbines at point-blank range. Bang! 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 At close range, I noted that the flintlock carbines were devastating, their high muzzle velocity proving lethal within a dozen paces. With each flash of the muzzle, I watched a sullen soldier or overseer fall. I saw lead bullets tear through the lightly armored slaves and overseers, causing massive casualties. The sullen defense crumbled before my eyes. Survivors either fell or fled in tears. Target the arrow tower. Roderick, plant the explosives. Cover him, Master Andre commanded, parrying a stray arrow. I watched Oliver and Mark provide covering fire while Andre and Roland engaged the remaining sullen soldiers to clear a path for Roderick. Andre and Roland fought like gods of war, and I saw them cut down every foe in their path. I observed Andre's strikes, which were steady and lethal, while Roland fought with aggressive, sweeping blows. Leading the charge, they carved a bloody path toward the partially constructed wooden arrow tower. I watched the five-man team push toward the tower's core. I saw Roland cleave an overseer in two, his body splattered with warm blood. Suddenly, I felt the air grow thick and stagnant with an ominous magical fluctuation. I watched a sphere of ink-black mist descend like a meteor, slamming into the center of the squad. Master Andre's warning came too late. I saw the mist hit the ground, releasing a silent, destructive shockwave. I saw Roland struck by an irresistible force, sent flying into a pile of timber, where he vomited blood. Only his Tier 2 Knight constitution saved his internal organs from shattering. I watched him struggle to rise, realizing this was a premeditated ambush. I saw the mist dissipate to reveal a figure. A tall, thin man in a dark gray hooded robe with crimson patterns stood there, and I noticed a cruel smile on his pale lips. He held a swirling orb of darkness, the Sorin warlock who had previously destroyed the fire arrows. I realized he had been lying in wait. Game over. The warlock sneered, and I saw his dark orb expand as he prepared to hurl it at the disoriented squad. The destructive energy within the orb made even me, standing at a distance, feel as if my soul were being drained. Frontal defense. Master Andre roared. I watched him erupt with brilliant silver battle chi, the peak of a Tier 3 Knight, and step between the warlock and his team. He raised his arm, and I saw his battle chi manifest as a thick, translucent energy shield. The warlock fired the orb. Boom! Darkness collided with light, and I heard a piercing shriek that seemed to tear space itself. I watched the black energy corrode the silver shield as the light fought to dissolve the darkness. The ground cracked and nearby timber turned to dust. I saw the shield shatter, but the orb's power was largely neutralized. Andre was knocked back, and I saw blood leaking from his lips, but he remained standing through sheer willpower. What? The warlock gasped in disbelief. He hadn't expected a mere knight to survive his spell. As the warlock hesitated, I saw Andre strike. Channeling his remaining strength, Andre became a silver flash, thrusting his sword toward the warlock's heart. The warlock, an experienced battle mage, recovered quickly. He raised his left hand, conjuring a shadow energy shield. Clang! I heard the sword strike the shield with a metallic ring, failing to pierce it. The warlock countered, forming an arcane blade of pure darkness and slashing at Andre's neck. Andre parried the blow. Clang! Sparks flew as I watched battle chi and dark magic clash. They engaged in a fierce duel. I saw Andre's strikes were steady and powerful, illuminating the area with silver light. The warlock moved erratically, using his arcane blade, curses, and mental attacks to disrupt Andre. It was a brutal clash of martial might and dark sorcery, and I saw Roland and the others forced to retreat as the energy waves destroyed the surroundings. Meanwhile, I realized the situation was worsening. The Solon soldiers, emboldened by the warlock's presence, rallied. Driven by officers and the execution squad, I saw them begin to form a perimeter. More torches appeared in the distance as I saw reinforcements arrive. "Captain, we're surrounded. We have to pull back," Roderick shouted while shooting a soldier. I realized the mission to destroy the tower had failed. Survival was now the priority. Andre heard him, but was locked in a life-or-death struggle, unable to break away or issue orders. I watched Roderick make a desperate choice. He discarded his empty carbine and pulled out a 40-kilogram explosive satchel. "Damn it, not for nothing." Roderick spat, lighting the long fuse. With a roar, I saw him spin and hurl the heavy satchel with all his might. "Go!" I watched the explosive soar in a high arc over the combatants, flying toward the base of the arrow tower. I watched the sorcerer spot the flying object and its sparks, his instant recognition of the threat clear as he moved to intercept it with a spell. Yet, in that split second of distraction, I heard a voice ring out. "Your opponent is me." I observed Master Andre seize the opening, his longsword glowing with silver battle chi as he unleashed a powerful, decisive strike at the sorcerer. Forced to focus entirely on his shadow shield, the sorcerer could not stop the projectile. Boom! I saw the explosive satchel miss the tower's main pillar, landing instead at the base of the foundation. Nearby, I watched the Solon soldiers gather around the smoking, sparking bundle, confused by its nature. "What is that?" "It's Plantagenet trash. The fuse. It's burning." I heard them cry out. Seeing the shortening fuse, I watched a soldier scream in terror. "It's explosives. Run!" But it was too late. The fuse reached the end. I witnessed a blinding flash and felt intense heat erupt. Boom! A massive fireball of smoke and flames surged from the base, followed by a shockwave that shook the ground like an earthquake beneath my feet. I saw the nearest Solon soldiers vaporized. Those further away were tossed like rag dolls, bones shattered, as debris rained down from above. The arrow tower's base buckled, its wooden structure splintering. I watched the tower groan and tilt dangerously, though it remained standing. The shockwave forced Andre and the sorcerer to break their duel, and I saw both using energy to shield themselves. Smoke, fire, and dust reduced my visibility to near zero. "Retreat. Now. To the corridor." I heard Andre roar through the ringing in his ears, signaling his team. I realized that Roderick's desperate strike had failed to topple the tower, but had created the chaos needed for their escape. The massive explosion stunned both the Solon soldiers blocking the corridor and the defenders on the hillside where I stood. I watched in shock as the tower groaned, tilted at a sickening angle, and rained debris. I held my breath, fearing the structure would collapse. Miraculously, the tower stabilized, though heavily damaged. I heard the Solonians sigh in relief. But before they could recover, I saw 5 blood-soaked figures burst from the smoke like ghosts. It was Andre, Roland, Roderick, Oliver, and Mark, charging into the rear of the Solon archer line. "Enemy! Behind us!" The warning was cut short by screams. I saw Molotov cocktails explode among them, and Andre's silver battle chi carve a lethal path through the ranks. I watched Roland follow, his arming sword hacking wildly. I saw Roderick, Oliver, and Mark fight like cornered tigers, slaughtering the archers who were unable to draw their bows in the chaotic melee. In the dark, close-quarters chaos, I noted that the long-range archers were helpless. The 5 tore a hole through the Solon line, causing panic and trampling among the enemy. "Push through. Back to the corridor." I heard Andre bellow, leading the charge. Their coordinated ferocity allowed them to break through the blockade in seconds. The surviving Solonians were too terrified to pursue. As officers tried to rally a chase, I watched the group enter the effective range of the city wall's muskets. Bang! 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 I saw precise shots drop the pursuers, forcing the rest to scramble for cover as the 5 sprinted toward the corridor. Just as Oliver reached the path, I saw a hidden Solon crossbowman take his shot. Thwip! Splat! I saw a bolt strike Oliver's knee, piercing leather and muscle. I heard Oliver scream, his leg giving out as he collapsed. I watched Roderick spin around, see his comrade down, and rush back under fire to reach him. "Hold on," I heard Roderick grunt, hoisting Oliver onto his back and sprinting for the corridor. "Cover them." I heard Brendan order from the walls. The defenders' fire intensified, while I watched Andre and Roland flank Roderick to protect him. Arrows whistled around them, striking the ground with lethal intent. With sheer willpower and covering fire, I saw the three reach the safety of the corridor's shadows. Raise the drawbridge. I heard Brendan command. The bridge rose, sealing them in. I watched the five collapse, gasping for air. I watched Roderick check Oliver. The bolt was deeply embedded, and he was bleeding heavily. I saw Andre lean on his sword, surveying his four surviving companions. I hurried down from the wall to meet them. I watched the four men struggle to their feet to salute me. Andre, exhausted and guilty, spoke weakly. "My lord, forgive us. We failed to destroy the tower, and Oliver is wounded." I stepped forward to return the salute. Seeing their bloodied state, I said sincerely, "No, you did well. The sorcerer had an ambush prepared. This was not your fault. Returning alive after damaging the tower is a great achievement. Rest now." I turned my concern to the wounded. "We must get you medical attention." Before I could finish, I saw Andre sway, his face turning paper white. His sword clattered as he collapsed forward. "Master! Captain!" I heard them cry. Roderick and I caught him before he hit the ground. Andre was ice-cold and barely breathing. "Conrad, quickly come here!" I shouted. I watched Conrad rush over, check Andre's pulse, and channel a sliver of magic into him. His expression darkened. "How is he?" I asked, sensing the worst. Conrad sighed heavily. As I feared, he took a direct hit from the sorcerer to protect his team. The dark curse has invaded his meridians and organs, consuming his life force. He was running on pure willpower. Now that he's relaxed, the curse has erupted. "Can he be saved?" I asked. Conrad shook his head regretfully. "Carl, I am a rune mage, not a healer or priest. This curse is deep in the soul. Only high-level, holy purification or hymn of life can remove it. I am powerless." Seeing my despair, Conrad added, "However, during my time at the Royal Capital's Academy of Arcane Arts, I studied techniques to suppress negative status effects and stabilize injuries. I cannot cure it, but I may be able to slow the curse's spread and buy him time." "Do it. Whatever it takes, stabilize him," I urged. Conrad nodded. "We must act immediately. I need a quiet, energy-stable environment." "Take him to my castle," I ordered. Guards carried the unconscious Andre away, with Conrad following. When Roland, Roderick, and Mark tried to follow, I stopped them. "You are all wounded. Go to the healers and rest." "That is an order." The three nodded and left, supported by auxiliary soldiers. I watched Andre depart, then looked toward the brightly lit Solon camp in the distance, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The raid had disrupted the Solonians' arrow tower construction, but exposed their tactical intent and cost me the heavy wounding of Andre and Roland. Both were essential to Conford's defense. Their absence would significantly weaken the garrison. I had lost this round. Harold had clearly anticipated the sortie and set a trap, with that mysterious mage serving as the killing blow. Recent victories had made me arrogant, leading me to underestimate the leader who had brought the Solon tribe to such power. With so many Plantagenet legends defeated by Harold, I realized I couldn't outmaneuver such a veteran warlord with mere tricks. After this, the Solonians would tighten their flank defenses, making similar raids nearly impossible. Conford would now be forced into a passive, defensive stance. We would have to watch helplessly as the Solonians built taller towers and siege weapons beyond cannon range. A heavy sense of powerlessness gripped me as the dawn broke over a darkening Conford. At 3 a.m., the Solon camp outside France City was cold and grim. Inside the command tent, Ulf slammed a report onto his desk, his temples throbbing. The brief lines on the parchment infuriated him. "Useless. 100,000 men under Harold, and they can't take a tiny fortress in half a month. It's a disgrace to the tribe." His Sparrow Legion was growing increasingly resentful. While others were raiding in the south, they were stuck freezing in the north, besieging the impenetrable France City. Seeing other legions return wealthy while his men suffered in the cold had shaken morale. With the siege dragging on, complaints within the camp were rising. Suddenly, the sounds of shouting, hoarse neighs, and musket fire erupted outside. "What is happening?" Ulf roared. A messenger rushed in, pale-faced. "Commander, the Fran City garrison opened the gates and sent a cavalry force to attack our forward camp." Ulf was startled but quickly regained his composure. Was Rockefort finally desperate enough to act? Or was this a ploy? He stepped out of the tent, flanked by his personal guards. In the pre-dawn light, Plantagenet cavalry were indeed tearing through the forward camp, burning tents and slaughtering soldiers. Ulf sneered. The Sparrow Legion, elite as they were, reacted instantly. Solon light cavalry moved to flank and cut off the attackers' retreat. Meanwhile, the infantry formed a spear wall, stabilizing the line and pushing back. The Plantagenet charge stalled, and the signal to retreat sounded from France City. The cavalry immediately turned and fled toward the gates. They moved with disciplined precision, slipping back inside before the Solonians could surround them. The heavy gates slammed shut, locking the pursuers out. The battlefield fell silent, littered with burnt tents and corpses. The Sparrow Legion's losses were minimal, while the enemy left behind several armored corpses. "All noise, no substance," Ulf muttered, frowning. "What is that old fox Rockefort planning? Sacrificing elite cavalry just to burn a few tents and kill a few men? It's meaningless." He didn't believe Rockefort would act so foolishly. There had to be a hidden motive. "Send word," Ulf commanded. "Double the scouts. Monitor the coast and forests for any other movement." "Yes," the messenger replied. Standing in the cold wind, Ulf stared at the silent city, his unease deepening. "Rockefort, what are you doing?" Meanwhile, on a quiet coast far from the main battlefield, the northern Great Wall ended here, its stone ramparts extending into the frozen North Sea. Winter had turned the churning waves into a vast, flat ice sheet, reflecting the dawn light. A force of about 500 men moved silently across the ice. Dressed in white camouflage, they moved with light, swift steps, leaving almost no trace. Unlike the noisy sortie at the city, their movements were calculated and secretive. These were Count Rockefort's elite, Northwind squad. They were not ordinary soldiers, but knights and elites with at least Tier 1 battle chi from France City. Some were even Tier 3 knights, the Count's final trump card for the most dangerous missions. To ensure speed on the ice, they wore only chainmail or leather armor, having discarded heavy plate. Carrying only 5 days' worth of rations and essential climbing tools, they were stripped for action. Their goal: cross the frozen strait to the ruins of Winter's Port, then race along the northern peninsula to Confort. The cavalry sortie at France City had been a mere distraction to draw Ulf's attention away from the Northwind squad's secret departure. I watched Sir Laurent stand at the vanguard, casting a final, resolute look toward the distant silhouettes of France City and Confort. "Men," Laurent announced clearly, "our mission is clear. Cross the frozen sea and the peninsula to reinforce Confort. This path is perilous. We face freezing temperatures, Solon scouts, blizzards, or the possibility that Confort may have already fallen." I watched Laurent scan his men, his voice hardening. "But we must try. For our brothers fighting in Confort, for Count Rockefort's trust, and for the North's last hope. Move out." There were no grand speeches or parting drinks. I watched 500 elite knights silently step onto the treacherous ice, marching toward the war-torn lands ahead. They vanished into the pre-dawn darkness and the vast, pale expanse of the ice field. While 500 men could not defeat an army of 100,000, I knew they represented the absolute limit of France City's resolve. They were a spark, a surprise force that might just turn the tide for the besieged castle. The odds were slim and the path fraught with danger. I knew their success remained uncertain. Regardless, they had begun their journey, entrusting their fate to the northern winds and the coming slaughter. At the Solon camp, I observed that the chaos of the night raid had subsided, leaving only the scent of smoke and blood. Under the lash of overseers, I saw slaves and craftsmen forced to clear the debris and repair the charred, leaning arrow tower. Harold stood on a nearby hill, his silhouette cold and rigid against the morning light. I watched him observe the workers swarming over the tower, his gaze deep and unreadable. The successful counter-ambush had been his calculated trap, planned days in advance. Through my skirmishes with him, Harold had discerned my tactical patterns. I favored unconventional, risky maneuvers to break stalemates. often catching the Solon army off guard. This creativity had indeed caused him significant trouble. Harold realized he needed to create a stage I could not resist. Thus, he chose the repairing the arrow tower ruse. He made a show of mobilizing resources, making his intent to threaten Conford's walls obvious. He knew I would never sit idly by while a lethal attack point was constructed. Driven by my daring nature, I was bound to send an elite team to destroy the tower at night. The warlock, Elaine, was his trump card. Hidden within the reserve force, Elaine was positioned to deliver a fatal blow once my raiders were deep in the trap. He expected the warlock to easily wipe out any conventional strike team. However, there was one unforeseen variable. He had not expected me to hide a Tier 3 knight, a powerhouse usually reserved for high command, in such a dangerous mission. The Tier 3 knight's explosive power nearly allowed my raiders to break through and destroy the tower. Harold paused, recalling the violent tremors of the tower base during the explosion, the most dangerous moment of his plan. Yet, the outcome ultimately favored him. To protect his comrades, the Tier 3 knight had forcibly resisted the warlock's magic, suffering severe internal backlash. With the accompanying Tier 2 knight also likely injured, I knew the Conford garrison's elite combat strength had been crippled. Without their top warriors, the defenders' resistance would crumble, easing the pressure on the Solon warriors. The trade-off was worth it. Elaine, the warlock, approached with a pale face, bowing respectfully. "Great Commander, I failed to kill the Tier 3 knight, allowing him to escape after damaging the tower. I misjudged their strength. I did not expect a Tier 3 expert." Harold turned to face him after a long silence. To Elaine's surprise, Harold smiled faintly. "Punishment," Harold said calmly as he walked down the hill. "Elaine, you did well enough. The tower still stands, and repairs are underway. More importantly, you crippled that Tier 3 knight. You also incapacitated the Tier 2 knight. Losing two such commanders is a heavier blow to their morale than our loss of materials." He stopped, looking toward the distant castle. Last night proved that the defenders are not infallible, and their commander, Karl von Schmidt, is not omniscient. "That is enough," he ordered. "Focus on recovering your strength. I will provide 100 slaves for you to drain their life essence to replenish your magic. We have more important battles ahead." Elaine's eyes glinted with bloodlust. "Thank you, great commander. I will recover quickly to serve you." Harold waved him off, and Elaine vanished into the morning mist. Leon approached, carrying a captured flintlock carbine with a shortened barrel, salvaged from the raid. Looking weary but curious, Leon held up the weapon. "Great commander, these Conford defenders have endless tricks. Look at this musket." He pointed to the mechanism. The flintlock is ingeniously crafted, far beyond the skill of an ordinary blacksmith. And they actually sawed off the barrel. It turns the shot into a wide-range scatterblast instead of a single line. These weapons are devastating at close range, especially in the chaotic night fighting we faced. Their ability to disrupt our charge despite their small numbers is exactly why they caused us such heavy casualties, I noted. I watched as Harold's attention was drawn to the strange firearm in Leon's hand, and he took the heavy carbine. I observed as it felt cold, precise, and distinctly industrial in his grip. I watched him examine the polished walnut stock, the steel barrel with its cold blue sheen, and the complex, sophisticated flintlock mechanism. It was clearly a masterpiece of Plantagenet craftsmanship, far beyond the capabilities of Solon artisans to replicate, as I well knew. Harold was no stranger to firearms and held them in high regard, as I observed from his focused expression. Decades of conflict with the Plantagenet kingdom had taught the Solon warriors the pain of facing our muskets and cannons, a fact I had witnessed firsthand. I watched him recall the lead balls piercing heavy armor from 100 paces and the roar of cannons shattering stone walls. His army had captured various firearms during this southern campaign, as I had seen during our skirmishes. However, I knew his men were horse archers, unskilled in the complex loading and maintenance required for these weapons. Most captured guns were discarded once they broke due to neglect. Holding this weapon, I saw Harold realize the technological gap was the true barrier to Solon's rise. I listened as he mused that they must move beyond mere looting. Solon needed its own industrial chain to manufacture and maintain firearms and cannons, a necessity I recognized as well. I watched him envision selecting bright youths to form a specialized unit, transforming their military through this technological shift. This plan became a cornerstone of his strategy, as I noted from the intensity in his eyes. I heard him decide that once Confort fell, he would capture every skilled artisan in the city. These craftsmen would be the foundation of Solon's future, as I understood his intent. Leon then brought up the strange naphtha bottles used by the defenders, and I leaned in to listen. I watched Harold recall the burning projectiles that turned the night into a sea of fire. "Those bottles are troublesome," Harold admitted to me. Leon explained the simple principle to us. A bottle filled with oil and a burning rag, which shatters on impact to create an inferno. Our craftsmen have already reverse-engineered them. They are easy to produce in bulk, Leon added. "We can even improve upon the design," Leon added, and I noted the dangerous gleam in his eyes. Harold was pleased. This was a cheap, effective incendiary weapon, and I could see his approval. He ordered them to also replicate the explosive satchels, suggesting smaller versions for sappers to use against the walls, while I watched intently. "Carl used those to collapse our walls and kill my men. Now, we shall return the favor," Harold sneered, looking directly at me. A scout, covered in dust and frost, rushed into the camp, and I turned to watch him. He knelt, breathless. "Great Chief, Eisenberg has finally moved. A force of 10,000 is advancing toward Confort. They are slow and disorganized, but their vanguard will reach our flank within 3 to 4 days," the scout reported to us. Harold scoffed at the news of the 10,000 reinforcements, and I observed his dismissive posture. "So, the old turtle Eisenberg finally poked his head out of eagleness?" Harold asked, glancing at me. "A mere 10,000, and moving so timidly? They are only putting on a show for their king," he declared. His generals laughed in agreement, though I knew the threat remained. Privately, I saw that Harold knew a regular Plantagenet army on his flank could not be ignored. It was a thorn that could cause trouble, as I silently agreed. Almost immediately, another messenger arrived with a report from France City, and I watched the interaction. It was a letter from Wolf, commander of the Sparrow Legion, which I observed being handed over. Wolf reported that Rochefort was still holding out, but had recently sent out small, aggressive cavalry sorties, a suspicious change in behavior that I noted. "My men have been freezing outside France City for months," the letter continued, which I heard read aloud. "While the other legions loot the interior, we have gained nothing. Morale is plummeting. If we cannot take the city soon, should we consider withdrawing before we lose our edge? Await your command." Harold handed the report to Leon without a word, and I watched them both. Leon read it, his brow furrowing as I observed. "Wolf has a point, Great Chief. The Sparrow Legion is exhausted," Leon said. Leon lowered his voice. "The truth is, this war weariness is spreading through the entire army, not just the Sparrow Legion," and I listened closely to his assessment. Harold was forced to acknowledge the growing unrest, and I saw the flicker of doubt on his face. It was an undercurrent I knew he could no longer ignore. Tribal leaders had already begun hinting to us that they had enough loot and that Confort was too costly to capture. "We have enough wealth and slaves to last years," they had argued in my presence. "Why bleed our warriors for a ruined shell of a city?" Others had warned that even a small Plantagenet relief force was a complication they didn't need, and I watched Harold weigh their words. "If we get bogged down here, we risk losing our hard-won spoils and failing our return to the northern frontier." Though phrased differently, the core sentiment was clear to me. The soldiers had grown rich and lost their hunger for battle. Initially, they fought for survival and wealth. Now, they were satiated. After months of pillaging, every survivor was laden with gold, silver, silk, porcelain, and chained slaves. Possessions breed fear of loss, and fear of loss kills the will to fight. Morale plummeted. The prospect of attacking the heavily fortified, stubborn Confort for little gain felt like a death sentence. Harold suppressed his frustration, knowing this apathy was more dangerous than any Plantagenet reinforcements. A commander's authority relies on providing both fear and the promise of reward. When soldiers see no profit and high risk, even the strictest orders lose their bite. Yet, this pressure was about to end. Harold's eyes sharpened. His hesitation vanished. He had a plan to break the stalemate. He turned to Leon, his voice resolute. Write a letter to Ulf immediately. Tell him and the doubters. Wait 5 more days. Carnford will fall. Victory and glory await every Solan warrior. Energized by the command, Leon bowed. Yes, great chieftain. Harold's unwavering confidence acted as a much-needed morale boost. Leon left to draft the letter. Alone, Harold stared at Carnford Castle. The morning sun hit the stone walls, but his gaze remained cold. He smirked, whispering to me, his distant rival. Karl von Schmidt, it seems you aren't always ahead. This time, I've outplayed you. Watch from your shell as your walls are eroded and your hope dies. Your end is prepared. The night wind couldn't extinguish the predatory glint in his eyes. The following days confirmed Harold's prediction. After the night raid, I knew the Carnford garrison was incapable of sorties. The rear cliff was sealed, and the secret pulley system was destroyed. Trapped, I watched my defenders helpless as 2 massive arrow towers rose higher than the mountain peak itself. When the Solan craftsmen finished, the towers loomed over the battlefield like giants. The sheer height of the towers cast a crushing psychological shadow over my garrison. Harold struck immediately. Elite Solan archers ascended the towers that afternoon. Each platform held 30 archers. 60 elite marksmen lined the battlements. They swapped light arrows for heavy, armor-piercing bolts. They aimed down at my garrison's concealed positions with cold precision. Fire, the officer commanded. The air hummed as 60 heavy bolts rained down like spears of death. Thud, crack. The volley shredded my defenders' wooden roof protections. The heavy bolts punched through the wood, sending splinters flying. Some bolts pierced multiple layers, pinning my defenders beneath. Watch above. Screams erupted as a dozen of my soldiers were struck through their cover. The heavy bolts tore through leather armor, causing horrific, bloody wounds. It was only the first wave. The Solan archers maintained a relentless, efficient rhythm. The constant rain of arrows left my garrison's defenses in tatters. Counterattack. Target the towers, my officers screamed. My surviving musketeers and archers tried to return fire through their loopholes. The tide had turned. Shooting upward, their accuracy was crippled by gravity and wind. The Solan archers held the absolute high ground. Meanwhile, Solan ground archers provided covering fire, further suppressing my defenders. My Carnford garrison was trapped in a passive, losing position. Caught in a crossfire from above and below, my casualties mounted rapidly. The scene was a chaotic mix of groans, shouts, and the relentless thud of incoming arrows. Our geographical advantage had been neutralized by the towers. The core of my corridor defense was under terminal strain. 2 hours of bombardment caused me catastrophic losses. Nearly 100 of my men were dead or wounded, and the wooden defenses were destroyed. The vertical rain of death broke the soldiers' spirits. Seeing the carnage, I realized that holding the outer positions was now a futile waste of life. I ordered a retreat to the inner city, effectively conceding the corridor and ending the 20-day standoff. Harold gave us no time to regroup. That same afternoon, as the remnants retreated, the Solan horns sounded for a full-scale assault. Thousands of rested Solan infantry and desperate slave soldiers flooded into the corridor, ready to claim the castle. I realized the situation had shifted dramatically. Without the crossfire from the hillsides, I saw that the narrow corridor was no longer a death trap for the Solonians. I watched as the attackers surged through the blood-soaked passage, crossed the abandoned fortifications, and scrambled up the stone ramp formed by their shield carts. What had held for 20 days was breached in seconds before my eyes. I saw slave soldiers, clutching wooden shields, burst from the corridor to face the final obstacle, the moat. I knew the moat was shallow and narrow, designed only to delay the enemy for our musketeers and archers. Fire! I shouted. The order roared, and I watched the inner wall erupt with the thunder of muskets and the hiss of arrows. Exposed in the open, the first wave of slave soldiers and Solan infantry were decimated, their bodies clogging the moat with blood as I watched. Yet, I saw that the Solonians were relentless. Wave after wave trampled over the corpses and the slick riverbed, turning the water into a churning, bloody slurry. Behind them, I observed Solonian archers moving into the corridor, raining precise fire upon the inner wall. I watched as my defenders were picked off one by one, falling from the battlements as they tried to return fire. Caught between the frontal assault and the archers above, I felt the defenders' firepower begin to falter under the mounting casualties. As the defenders were suppressed, I saw more Solonians reach the base of the inner wall. I knew the true nightmare had begun. At the wall's base, I watched slaves claw at the masonry with chisels, iron rods, and hammers. Others hoisted scaling ladders. Rocks, logs, excrement. Pour. I heard the officers scream. I watched as heavy stones and logs crushed the sappers, while boiling fecal soup rained down, causing horrific agony to those below. Still, I saw the Solonians press on, using the bodies of their fallen as stepping stones to continue the assault. As ladders touched the wall, I watched Solonian infantry climb with ladder-climbing knives. I saw my defenders counter with spears, axes to sever hooks, and jars of burning oil. Each toppled ladder I saw was marked by the screams of falling men. The battle devolved into a brutal, close-quarters melee before me. I realized every inch of the wall had become a slaughterhouse of steel and agony. Driven by the threat of Solonian blades and the promise of freedom, I watched the slaves throw themselves at the walls like cattle. Below, I saw Solonian infantry brace the ladders, using their own bodies to prevent them from being pushed away. Though I saw each slave quickly dispatched, their suicidal persistence exhausted the defenders' strength and focus. In the wall's blind spots, I noticed other slaves hammering away at the ancient bricks. The rhythmic clanging was deafening to me. As bricks loosened, I saw the slaves clutch them like precious treasures. "I have a brick," one cried, and I watched him clutch the mud-stained stone as if it were a lifeline, scrambling back toward the rear. By Solonian law, I knew a brick pried from the enemy wall earned a reprieve from the front lines. I realized hope had been reduced to a cold, heavy stone. I watched Harold from an arrow tower, his gaze cold and detached through his telescope. I observed him watching the endless tide of his troops and the few slaves fleeing back with their trophies. I saw that he recognized the bricks. Suddenly, I heard a cannon from the inner wall roar. I saw a shell slam into the ground near the fleeing slaves. The explosion obliterated them, and I watched the men and their passports to life turn into gore and dust. I saw hope crushed in an instant. I watched Harold observe without emotion, as if he were watching ants being stepped on. I knew he cared nothing for the slaves. I noted that he only cared that the wall was finally being compromised. "Pass the order," Harold said coldly. "Send the second wave, and give them their gifts." The order was relayed, and I saw this new wave was different. I noticed each slave carried a small, oilcloth-wrapped package. These were clearly imitations of the explosive satchels I had seen used by the defenders. I realized Harold's craftsmen had reverse-engineered them from battlefield scraps. Though less stable than the originals, I knew they were far more destructive. I saw others carry clay jars, crude copies of our Molotov cocktails. I realized the Solonians had quickly grasped the principles of these weapons and put them into mass production. Their ability to learn and adapt was terrifying to me. Like a cold sponge, I saw them absorb their enemies' strengths to forge new blades against us. I saw the slaves carrying these explosives were paralyzed with even greater despair. I knew they understood these packages were not just tools of war, but faster tickets to their own deaths. Driven by the lash, I watched them surge once more toward the wall. I felt the base of Conford had become a hellscape. The moat was filled with corpses, and I saw the attackers wading through a slurry of blood and rot. The assault spread along the entire wall, and I saw Solonians swarming like ants. The battle for the battlements reached a fever pitch in my view. Despite our desperate resistance, I saw the sheer volume of the assault force breaches in several sectors. I watched heavy-armored Solonian knights climb the ladders, wielding battle axes and maces to carve out a foothold. I felt the absence of Master André and Roland keenly. Without their prowess, I knew every repelled knight cost us dearly in blood. Musketeer Company. Front battlements. Volley. I heard an officer scream. Bang, bang, bang. I watched my musketeers fire at point-blank range, their lead balls punching through even the heavy plate armor. I saw knights collapse in sprays of blood, falling from the ramparts. The volley bought us time, but I knew the crisis remained. The assault at the base was more dangerous, as I knew the loss of the hillside positions left the wall's foundation vulnerable. I watched slaves hammer and claw at the masonry, their work hidden by the chaos above. The dull, rhythmic thudding of their tools sounded like a death knell beneath my feet. I watched as our defenders tried to pick off the slaves mining the wall, but they were suppressed by precise, heavy arrows from the rear. I saw the wall's foundation being pried apart, causing cracks to spread and the structure to groan. Suddenly, I saw a heavy, irregular canvas-wrapped bundle hurled from the battlements, crashing into the densest cluster of slaves. I watched the slaves look up in confusion as the bundle struck one of them. I saw them scream at the sight of the hissing, sparking fuse just before a cataclysmic explosion engulfed them. Boom! I witnessed the 40 kilograms bundle, packed with black powder, caltrops, and iron shards, detonate with devastating force. I saw a cloud of fire, smoke, and gore erupt from the impact site. I watched the shockwave shred nearby slaves and Solon soldiers, while shrapnel turned those further away into sieves. The wall base was cleared, leaving behind a nauseating scene of carnage and blood that I could not look away from. The blast decimated the workers and shattered the attacking forces' morale, which I noted with grim satisfaction. I saw the surviving slaves panic and attempt to flee. Deserters die? Execution squad, forward! The Solon officer roared, and I watched his men obey. I watched the execution squad cut down the fleeing slaves, forcing the rest to halt. Second wave. Use the explosive satchels. Below the wall, the officer commanded, and I watched him drive a new group of terrified slaves toward the blood-soaked wall. I saw the defenders on the wall had no respite, immediately facing new scaling ladders and incoming arrows. I watched the second wave of slaves, driven by the execution squad, rush over the pile of corpses to the wall. I saw them shove small, improvised explosive satchels into the wall's cracks, ignite them, and scramble back. Bang! Boom! I felt successive explosions rock the wall, causing significant structural damage. I watched the ancient wall tremble, its internal structure loosening as cracks webbed across the masonry. I saw the defenders struggle to keep their footing as morale plummeted. Don't let them continue. Throw the explosives. Otto bellowed, and I saw his eyes were bloodshot. I watched the defenders heave another 40 kilograms explosive bundle over the battlements. Boom! I saw a massive explosion incinerate the gathered slaves and nearby Solon soldiers. The area at the base of the wall was cleared once more, as I observed from my position. Yet, I saw the Solon assault continue like an endless tide. A third wave arrived immediately. I watched these slaves carry Molotov cocktails, hurling them toward the battlements with their remaining strength. Most hit the outer wall, but I saw some land among the defenders. I watched the clay pots shatter, spreading sticky, burning liquid. Fire! Help! I heard screams erupt as soldiers were set ablaze. I saw several defenders become human torches, their leather armor catching fire. I watched their attempts to extinguish the flames with sand or clothes prove ineffective. As fire threatened to ignite nearby ammunition, I felt a chilling, icy current surge from behind the gatehouse. I watched the cold wave instantly snuff out the flames, leaving only smoke and charred remains. I saw the burning soldier saved, though he was severely scorched. I watched the survivor gasp, looking toward the source of the magic. I saw Morian standing in the shadows of the inner city stairs, lowering his staff with a firm gaze. Though I knew he was forbidden from direct combat, he was permitted to provide emergency magical support. I recognized that his timely intervention saved lives and halted the fire. I watched Morian nod at the soldier and return his focus to the battlefield, staff ready. I saw the Solon assault intensify as new infantry charged forward. I watched them climb ladders and hurl more improvised explosives onto the wall. While less lethal than the heavy bundles, I noted that the blast disrupted the defenders' formation and rhythm. I saw the wall become chaotic and visibility drop. Now, scale the wall, the Solon officer shouted, and I watched him send plate armor knights rushing up. I watched the knights climb the ladders, ignoring arrows, and leap onto the battlements. Spearmen, hold the line, the defender officer croaked, and I listened to his desperate command. I watched the wall turn into a meat grinder. Spearmen thrust their weapons through the gaps. I saw them fight to knock the invading knights back. I heard screams fill the air as Solon soldiers were struck and fell. I watched the Solon knights use shields to deflect spears before leaping onto the wall to engage in brutal melee with axes and maces. I saw more Solon infantry swarm the ladders, turning the wall into a chaotic slaughterhouse. I heard the sounds of clashing steel, breaking bones, and dying roars fill the air as soldiers fought with everything they had. I saw blood soak the bricks, freezing into dark red streaks in the sunset. Beneath the walls, I watched the slaves continue their frantic labor. Constant, small-scale explosions eroded the wall's foundation, widening cracks and sending debris raining down. The wall groaned, teetering on the brink of collapse. As the sun dipped, the sky bled into a vivid orange. The brutal meat grinder battle raged until dusk, with both sides committing their final reserves. Conford's Soul Cannon roared, targeting the corridor to block Solonian reinforcements and inflicting heavy casualties. Harold, watching from a distant tower, remained unmoved, coolly ordering wave after wave of troops to exhaust the defenders' limited ammunition with their lives. By dusk, the cannon fell silent. The shells were spent. I watched the carnage from the now-quiet battery. My elite 600 standing army soldiers had been cycled through repeatedly, suffering heavy losses. The current defenders were mostly untrained serfs, farmers, and craftsmen, men lacking the skill and discipline of the battle-hardened Solon warriors. Yet, they fought with desperate resolve, using their bodies to plug gaps and trading lives for every inch of ground. It cost 2 or 3 of my men to fell a single Solon veteran. Their courage was the only thing holding the crumbling line together. I, emotionless, continued to send fresh, terrified recruits to the slaughter. I knew Harold was doing the same. This had become a war of attrition, a test of whose will would break first. Blood-red sunset illuminated a castle piled high with corpses. Like 2 exhausted giants, the armies refused to let go of each other's throats. Driven by death, the slaves finally pushed the demolition to a critical point. With a final series of explosions, the key foundations of the outer city wall gave way. Boom! Massive sections of the wall collapsed inward. Soldiers on both sides were buried under the avalanche of stone and dust. A momentary silence gripped the field, followed by the wild, triumphant horns of the Solon army. The wall is breached. Kill them all. Solonian officers roared. Elite knights and heavy infantry surged toward the gaps like wolves. Defenders scrambled to plug the breaches with spears and blades, desperate to stop the flood. Clang, flash, thud. The elite forces clashed in the narrow gaps, a cacophony of steel, screams, and roars. Men fell, only to be trampled by those rushing to take their place. The ground turned into a slaughterhouse. A few fierce Solon knights broke through into the outer city. They were met with a hail of gunfire from windows and rooftops. Bang, bang. Flintlock muskets echoed, dropping the knights in their tracks. The defenders used their knowledge of the terrain to harass and attempt to push the enemy back. But the breach was a broken dam. The flood was unstoppable. While the main force was occupied at the gaps, more Solon infantry scaled the remaining walls. The depleted defenders were overwhelmed, split, and annihilated. As more Solonians flooded the outer city, organized defense dissolved into desperate urban warfare. The outer city had fallen. From the battery, I saw the defeat clearly. The cannons had already been moved to the inner city. Watching my soldiers die and civilians flee, I ordered, "Brendan, the outer city is lost. Organize the subjects to retreat to the inner city. All combat units, fall back and fight street by street to buy time for the civilians." I waited for Brendan's usual immediate compliance. Instead, an uneasy silence followed. "My lord," Brendan said, his voice raspy but firm, pointing to the wall. "Go to the inner city to organize the defense. Leave the rear guard to me." I turned, shocked by this defiance. Brendan rushed. "The Solonians have breached the wall. Their archers will take the high ground soon. You are in danger." As if on cue, whoosh, whoosh, heavy arrows whistled toward the battery, targeting me.